Good evening and welcome to the school committee August 5th, 2020 school committee meeting / parent forum. It is 5:02. I'm calling this meeting to order. Pursuant to the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated March 16, 2020, the Holliston School Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the HCAT webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I ask that all school committee participants and other participants speaking to remotely, if you're remotely attending, please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak. At this time, I'll take a roll call attendance. Ms. Koshin.
Present.
Dr. Savard.
Present.
Mr. Morton.
Present.
Ms. Naborski.
Present.
Mrs. Raffi present. I don't believe we have anyone else on just yet. At this time, I'll accept a motion to participate in this meeting remotely.
Moved by Lisa.
Moved by Dawn, seconded by Lisa. Roll call vote. Ms. Koshin?
Yes.
Dr. Savard?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Ms. Naborski?
Yes.
Mrs. Raffi, yes. Great, thank you all. Good evening, everyone. So this first part of the agenda is scheduled for our parent question and answer forum. I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Kuska. This is her first official public engagement, if you will, with our parent community. And before I have her take the floor, I would just also like to welcome all of our administrators who are also joining us this evening. So hi all, you know, this is our third consecutive night together, so great to see your smiling faces. And Dr. Kuska will introduce you all as you move through the Q&A. So with that being said, please join me in welcoming Dr. Susan Kuska.
Good evening, everyone. It's, as you said, our third night together, and I did send out to parents. Hopefully parents that are attending tonight have had an opportunity to look at our presentation that they may have been walked through with us on Monday night. And then we linked that up to the website with the first draft of the proposal for the reopening in the fall on the website so that they have those as resources. And I also sent them out the recorded meeting from Monday night that they could watch prior to night, just to be ready for that if they had not been able to see it. So we're really at a time in unusual circumstances here with a unprecedented situation, and we've done our best to come up with a proposal that we think is feasible for students, safe for everybody to return to school in some platform, and it's still subject to change. So if you think about what DESE has had us prepare for, we have a draft plan and tentatively due on August 10th. And it really, even if we are able to vote on the model at this time, which would not be tonight, we have a lot of pieces to work through. Some of that is finances. There are definitely some budgetary and staffing considerations in order to bring about a plan with more personnel and more items for resources than we've ever had to commit to before. So that would still have to be determined. I also want to make sure that we are understanding that while parents are getting this proposed plan, it is subject to change for other reasons, such as we still have to look at contractual obligations of our staff and some collective bargaining. If there are schedule changes, if there are parts of their agreement in the collective bargaining agreement that might change, that still has to be bargained in order for this plan to come to fruition. Certainly have more questions from parents and staff, and we're trying to address that as we potentially put some revisions towards the model before, hopefully on Monday. We also want to make sure that we continue to get some more guidance from DESE, and that has been coming daily. I just received an invitation to another meeting from the commissioner tomorrow, so I'm not sure what new information we might hear. but all of this can impact these decisions. So I just want to make sure that I caution everybody that while we are putting a proposal here, and even when the school committee gets to the point of deciding whether to vote on this proposal, there are still so many other mitigating factors that could impact the final plan for parents, for the community, and for staff. And ideally, we want to get working on being able to implement a plan, but it's subject to change. And of course, the virus itself is making us the unknown circumstances that could change. So I want to just remind everybody of that in the planning process. For tonight, we have a very rigorous expectation that we put a demand on our administrators, and I want to thank them all for all the countless hours they've put in, because it's unusual to be working this many hours this summer, and I appreciate that. They've been wonderful to work with. We received, between the online link to Google that I had sent out, we received about 300 plus questions from parents in there. And then we received another 200 something questions that were sent directly to school committee or sent to our staff that we tried to incorporate as well. So with 500 plus questions, I can't promise you that we're going to be able to address all of them. What we've tried to do for tonight is to group them together so that we're trying to answer and respond to questions that are very similar, but we're not going to be able to read questions. So I want to clarify that for now. We've only allotted about an hour for that, and I know that's going to be a very short time, so we may go over a little bit. But I also want to make sure we transition to our school committee meeting so we can hear some of the concerns and discussion there. And as we transition to the school committee meeting, I would like to see if we can let our administrators just attend the first part of the school committee meeting and then be able to head out to their families after that while we continue as central office with the school committee for the second part of our meeting. So we're here tonight to start that conversation with parents, and I want to let parents know we're going to do our best. But more importantly, we're going to have some small parent meetings at the school level. We haven't determined what they will look like yet. We're trying to consider all of that. But within the next couple of weeks, they should receive some communication. So if you feel like your question is not answered tonight, please don't think you're being ignored. It's really about what can we get through with a multiple amount of people on this forum tonight, knowing that we're going to come back school specific and get some more detailed discussion in those meetings at the school level within the next few weeks. So thank you all, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Botello so he can talk about the hybrid model and remote learning part of that, because I know there were a lot of questions about that.
You'd think I would have learned to unmute myself by now, but here we go. Yes, we had lots of questions about the model. Some of which you clearly had read the plan, and others who are just processing it for the first time. So I'll try to kind of clarify some of those components. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, wow. Actually, I'm not going to, because that's not working right this second. So as far as the models, what the proposal is calling for is what we're calling a partial hybrid plan. What that means is we have part of our district who we're proposing goes in person on a daily basis, and the other part of the district is in a hybrid, meaning that some kids, part of the kids in those grade levels will be going in person, and part will be going remote, and then they'll be switching, and I'll explain that a little. So our pre-K through 3, we are proposing will be full in-person daily. That means that they will be going to school daily for 5.5 hours per day with a remote learning 50 to 60 minutes beyond that once they get home, which is primarily an asynchronous unified arts. That meaning that they will be engaging in some of the unified arts curriculum, not in real time with their teachers, but through experiences that the unified arts will present to them through some asynchronous videos, as well as specific assignments, and then also feedback that will occur asynchronously. So again, elementary, pre-K through 3 would be full in-person daily. Now in elementary, pre-K through 3, at elementary in K through 3, those students would also have a remote learning option as well. And so if there are students within those grade levels who prefer to be fully remote because of health conditions or other circumstances, parents would have that option as well. One question that came up is like, is there a hybrid option for pre-K through 3? And no, there's not a hybrid option for pre-K through 3. It's either that full in-person daily or a fully remote option that exists for them. As far as grades 4 through 12, they would be on a hybrid plan. The way that would work is we would break kids into 2 cohorts. Cohort 1 would be going to school on Monday and Tuesday in person, while cohort 2 is engaging in the learning remotely. Cohort 2 would then be going to school in person on Thursday and Friday, while cohort 1 is engaging remotely. And then on Wednesday, it would flop week to week. So in the first week, cohort 1 would be in person on Wednesday, and then the next week, cohort 2 would be. There were some. Now, all of those grades also would have a fully remote option. So if a parent and student decided because of health conditions or other circumstances that they wanted to be fully remote, they could choose that option. We've already, surveyed folks a little bit to get a sense of where people are currently landing on that. But then there'd be some kind of more formal way for parents to inform us whether they intended to have their kid start off in either the full in-person in pre-K through 3 or the hybrid in 4 through 12, or whether they would be choosing the fully remote option for their children. Another question that came up was, can you switch? And the answer is yes. You would be able to, say you started off fully remote and in any grades, and then you wanted to say in the middle school, and then you wanted to go to join the hybrid so that you could be in person part of the time and then have a partial remote, you could switch. Currently, the thinking would be to have that happen 3 or 4 times a year. That's when you would be able to switch, so we could accommodate some of the class size changes that would occur and make sure that we are prepared for the physical distancing that's necessary for adding more children. But we are still determining again whether it's going to be like 3 or 4 times a week, or whether we can, if we can be more flexible than that, we would be more flexible than that as well. But that's our current thinking. But you certainly can switch, and the same goes for the other way. If you at some point you had a child who was either fully in person at the early elementary level or in a hybrid, and you decided that you wanted to switch them to a more fully remote program, you would be able to switch. Again, there still might be some need for flexibility about when they would be kind of joining that remote cohort, but you would be able to switch. So you're not locked in for the entire year. There were some questions about cohorts, like how would cohorts be formed? And the thought is to form cohorts the best we can so that families would be aligned on the same cohort regardless of the grade level or school that they're in, so that if you had a high school student on cohort 1 and then a 4th grader, you would have them both on the same cohort. This will not work out perfectly because the complexities of the schedule do not allow this to work perfectly, but we will be doing our best to line that up. And the current thinking is to try to do that primarily alphabetically. But we at the same time need to make sure that we have pretty much equal 50-50 in each cohort, and that doesn't always work the same exactly from grade level to grade level or school to school. As well as the complexities of some of the course offerings at the high school kind of will make that not allow it to be perfect, as well as some other complexities in the schedule. But we would be doing our very best to do that. Someone asked if they wanted their children actually to be in different cohorts, because perhaps they're helping to support their children's learning at home. Would we consider that? And we certainly would consider it. We will try to be as flexible as possible. At the same time, this puzzle is a mammoth one, and there will be some limitations to what we can do. But certainly, when we can be flexible, we would be. Another question that came up was around remote learning and what that would look like. And I think the questions often came up not only around if we were in a fully remote program, but also if my child was in experiencing remote as part of the hybrid models in 4 through 12. What might that look like? What we've really worked to do is have the experience of remote kids be as, kind of in sync with our hybrid kids or our in-person kids in pre-K3 as possible. So, for example, in the hybrid model, the kids who are remote, whether they're fully remote or they're, again, remote for those 2 days of that week or 3 days of that week, while their other cohort are in person, they would be following the same curriculum at the same time as those kids. They would be really part of a classroom of which half the kids on a certain day are remote and half the kids are in person. There would be opportunities for kids to experience the same kind of mini lessons that the kids in person would be doing. At times that might be a live synchronous mini lesson where the teacher or one of the teachers is presenting to the kids in the classroom, and at the same time, allowing that to the live stream to kids at home. It might be a situation where one of the teachers on the team is doing a mini lesson for the kids at home separately from the other kids. There also would be opportunities for the teachers as part of the hybrid to be interacting with kids who are at home while they're interacting with kids in school. We've developed a model that has a staffing available to not only to be able to kind of supervise all the kids who are in school, but also that allows them to interact with kids at home as well. Now, you shouldn't expect in most circumstances that if a kid is at home, that they're logged on the entire time synchronously to the teacher for the entire period. That's not really what kind of kids do when they're in school. They might be sitting there, but they're experiencing some kind of direct instruction. They're then which is setting them up to work independently or in groups. They're working independently or in groups, which we will be working to orchestrate, both for in-person kids and kids at home. So they might be interacting with kids who either are remote as well, or with kids who are in the classroom. Perhaps they're producing a shared work of writing with a kid who's on a remote day and a kid who's in the classroom is in an in-person day. So there'll be interactions between both kids and teachers, whether they're in remote or in person. And then there'll be opportunities for teachers and kids to kind of check back with kids during the period. Now, the details of that really are in the hands of our teachers, and we're looking forward to kind of digging into that more with teachers over the next several weeks, as well as in those days prior to the start of school. But we're looking for a kind of a balance between, synchronous opportunities where kids are live, in time, interacting with teachers or students that are in person, as well as asynchronous situations where kids might be viewing a mini lesson that's been produced ahead of time and using that to kind of take their next steps towards their learning, as well as taking advantage of the opportunities for interaction through feedback, whether it's commenting on a Google Doc or shared writing that might be going on between a teacher and a student or a student and a student. So those types of opportunities as well. But it's certainly, like, we look at like what happened last spring is that we were kind of in crisis teaching. We really were proud of the work that our teachers did in order to respond to that situation. But now we have much, much more information about what that looks like, much more time to kind of prepare for this remote learning and distance learning than we were when we were kind of responding in real time in the spring. So those were the main questions that I had around the model and options. So I think I'm going to turn it over back to Lynn in the health and safety questions.
Yeah, before we move to Lynn for a second, I do want to just reassure parents. I know everybody's stressed, teachers are stressed, administrators, we're all going through a lot of anxiety about what the year is going to look like. And the biggest thing the common theme that I was seeing in all the questions that Peter alluded to is truly that parents were looking for some reassurance that if our students are in a remote model, that they're not out there alone while parents are trying to work. So there's going to be an expectation for some more, even if they're not in person, that they'll have some more in-person blending there. But it does look different from grade level to grade level. And we want to have some autonomy with our teachers and help them have a voice in that, because they know the content and they know what would work asynchronously and synchronously. So the sooner we can get a model in place as far as what we know, then we need the next weeks to start implementing that model. And the remote portion of that's going to be very important to that process.
And actually, one more thing to add, part of the real hope of being in person in the beginning of the year is we see that in-person portion as not only doing things that are just better done in person or just perhaps even not possible remotely, but also as an opportunity to develop the skills and the routines that allow our kids to be more productive when they are remote. Whether that's when they are remote in our hybrid, where they're still coming back and forth to us in person, or, God forbid, if the virus gets worse and we need to go to a fully remote situation. So that in-person portion is really critical to that. We will develop other mechanisms if the virus gets into a position where we need to go remote sooner, but really that in-person is again, and part of those skills that allow kids to be more effective in a remote environment are the skills that are the core of our work, separate from this whole situation. Kids' ability to kind of work independently, kids' ability to kind of create both on their own, but also in collaboration with their peers. So some of these things that we're really trying to develop are skills that are absolutely necessary for kids to thrive in a remote environment, but also the skills that we really want to develop for kids, even if we weren't in this situation. Some of those 21st century skills that we've spoken about. So, we're hopeful that dealing, lemons into lemonade, that we can use the situation to really kind of, push some of the skills and the work that we aimed for prior to this situation, because it's absolutely necessary in this hybrid or remote environment. And so we're really trying to kind of think about it in that way. There was also another question about why not more than pre-K to 3? Physically, the space in the building does not allow with 6-foot distancing for us to have more kids in. We've already been incredibly creative about how we aim to get pre-K through 3 in on a daily basis. And we really were not comfortable with using 3-foot distancing. There was a point in the summer where we were considering it, but as we got more medical information, it wasn't, it would be a risk that we were not willing to take with our kids and with our staff. As much as we really, really wanted to get more kids in, we had to balance, what is educationally sound and what is safe. And safety, certainly, it trumps everything. And so that's why we went with, this plan that we have.
Thank you, Peter. And we obviously, health and safety is a huge consideration in all the models we propose. So Lynn will take us 10 minutes, so hopefully to try to sum up some of the real key points that people were asking about.
Hello, I'm Lynn Bowler, the nurse leader for the school district, if I haven't met you in the past. So I'm obviously health and safety is paramount in all our minds. Just to start off, I want to let you know that the safety of our students, our school staff, our Holliston community, the health and safety of everyone was paramount in devising our proposed draft. We know that we can mitigate the virus by doing some things that we've all been learning about, but we can't eradicate it at this time. So in order to keep that virus at bay, to keep it mitigated, we've all been talking about face coverings. We've been talking about physical distancing, hand washing and sanitizing. We've been talking about developing cohorts in the Holliston school communities. And of course, if you're sick, you stay home. So all of these requirements were thoughtfully considered when we put together this proposed plan. And that was our starting point. So I just wanted to throw that out there at that point. Another safety measure that we are proposing in the plan is school attendance guidelines for both our staff and students. We are asking staff to self-screen at home, and there is a link right on our proposal, I believe page 28 to be exact, if you haven't had a chance to peek at it, where it shows you exactly what staff should be doing at home, signs and symptoms, what they should be watching for, questions they should ask themselves before they come to school each morning. We also have a similar self-screen in place for parents to go over with their students, and we're asking, again, parents and students that are able to go over that every single morning before they come to school. There's actually going to be a signed agreement that parents will sign at the beginning of the school year in Power School, just so that you have notice of it. You know what the guidelines are as far as whether or not they should be in school, if they've been close to someone that has COVID-19, somebody in the family, travel, all those considerations. So those are some of the other safety measures we put in place. I want to talk about briefly is PPE. That's the big one, the personal protective equipment. Face coverings are required for all our students, and that is pre-K through 12. I know earlier on, and Desi has mentioned grade 2 and above. As a Holliston school community, we felt much more comfortable with pre-K through 12. And what we have found from our extended school year program with our little ones coming into school, everyone has been handling that quite well. Our littlest ones, our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds are wearing those face coverings just as our 10 and 12-year-olds. Again, face coverings are required unless there is a disability, medical disability, and that we will look at independently. But otherwise, all students and staff should be wearing face coverings every day. Other questions? I'm just grouping them together because there were several questions that were all quite similar. And a lot of it has to do with what protocols are in place. What if a student or staff member is exposed to COVID? What do we do if we send somebody home sick? What does that look like in school? So trying to be as clear but yet explain it as well as I can. I just want to talk first about close contact, and that is key. What is a close contact? Because if you say someone tells you or you find out you've been exposed to COVID-19, what does that mean? A close contact is being within 6 feet of an infected person for more than 10 to 15 minutes. So if you are walking down the hallway and passing someone and you're not within their 6 feet for an extended period of time, 10 to 15 minutes, we are not considering that a close contact. So just to clarify that, I think that's just a good point. And we use that quite often when we're doing tracing to figure out who close contacts are. For example, say a student or staff member has been exposed to COVID-19, and so a student was a close contact. So what happens then? Regardless whether the student has any symptoms, if they are a close contact of a person that has had COVID-19, they must quarantine at home or be tested. The quarantine is for 14 days. If the person elects not to be tested, they need to be home for 14 days. If they are tested, we're going to look for a negative result before they come back to school. And guidelines are saying it's best to wait 3 to 4 days before you go for the testing if you have been exposed. So again, negative testing, you may return to school. We do want documentation of that negative testing as well. If the testing comes back positive, then you must isolate at home for 10 days and be fever-free before you come back to school. So I just wanted to put those out there. We are going to put a type of pictorial graph in place and hopefully get that together maybe for school committee meeting tomorrow. But just so I could go over it a little briefly tonight. So what happens if someone in school, a staff member, all of a sudden has some symptoms? They have high fever, they're coughing. What happens then? Well, then they would come down. They would be, a teacher would call the nurse ahead of time. We would meet the student. We would assess the student. And if we feel that this student is having symptoms, possible symptoms of COVID-19, then they would be put in the medical isolation room. And the students and staff that were in that classroom would be moved to an alternate location, and so that room could be disinfected, just precautionary. The student would then go home and they would follow up with their primary care physician whether or not they need to be having testing. Say the student has a sore throat and a fever of over 100. The doctor sees them and they have strep throat. Well, obviously they don't need COVID testing. We have an alternate diagnosis. They can come back to school once they're fever-free. So I know there's a lot to this, and the nurses and we have been working on this for months. The guidelines have changed several times and it can be confusing, but we hope to get things out to you that's a little bit clearer. But that's about all I want to say about that at this time. So what is the plan for contact tracing? Another question that came in. We are going to be working closely with our Holliston Board of Health and our infectious disease nurse from Salmon VNA, and I've worked with them quite a bit in the past. So if we have a case and we need to figure out contact tracing, we certainly will get some history from the family, and then this will be any COVID tests that are positive, automatically our whole Holliston Board of Health is notified. Question about testing students and teachers for COVID-19. We will not be doing that in school. That is not something that we can do. It's going to be done independently, and there are several sites located in the area. And some of them have different times as far as getting results, and that's still ever changing, but more and more sites are popping up. I know one just popped up recently in Framingham, which is good to know. One question about first graders requiring to wear masks. Yes, they are. All students grade pre-K through 12, unless they have documented medical disability, should be wearing face coverings. Full time. One question was, when will students be able to return to school full time? Well, hopefully soon, but the guidelines will be coming out from the Mass Department of Health, DESE, obviously when there's a decrease in virus and when we feel more comfortable to safely decrease our distancing to spread out, but that will come from the state as far as when we can return to school. There's questions regarding sensitivity to Clorox wipes or sanitizers. And I can tell you that soap and water is by far the best for cleaning hands above the sanitizers. Soap and water, if you have sensitivity to anything in sanitizers, you're certainly welcome to bring your own from home. All our disinfectants do not contain any bleach. So that is also good to know. And what happens with cold and flu season pops up? Good question. Kids will have runny noses and cough. Of course, they will be evaluated at the school nurse's office, referred to the primary care. The primary care will either come up with an alternate diagnosis, meaning it's just a cold, or send them for COVID testing. Again, if they are sent out because they have fever and cough, we do need documentation from the healthcare provider before they can come back to school, or a negative COVID test. What about moving in the hallways? We're going to do in the high school, Adams School, I believe as well. There's going to be one-way movement in the hallways, one-way traffic. And at the early elementary schools, those kids can be physically spaced 6 feet, and they will always be with chaperones at that age level. District following messages. What about travel bans? This was a question, of course. Our governor has put out travel bans for Massachusetts anywhere besides New England states, New Jersey and New York. And I think Rhode Island is going to be changed to a red state soon. In other words, they will not be a safe state for travel. I think that's happening on Friday is what I'm hearing. So when people return from a high-risk state, they must quarantine or have a negative COVID test. And how will we follow up on that? We certainly can follow up knowing, because we can follow up on kiddos' absences, knowing if they have been out or on that COVID test. But again, it's going to be basically on people's words to do the right thing. What else? I think we'll go with one more. What criteria to determine full remote? Well, again, that will be determined. If we have to go back to a full remote, that will be determined by the local and state Board of Health. And what about restrooms? There's questions about restrooms and cleaning and hygiene, and we've done a whole lot of work and planning in regards to that. We are following the guidelines from the Center for Disease Control, CDC, which includes the maintenance of the bathrooms, making sure we have functional toilets, cleaning, disinfecting. The bathrooms will be clean and disinfected several times during the day and the close of every day. And I think, Jess, you have the next question.
I do. I am Jess Beatty, the assistant principal at the middle school. And who better to answer questions on behavior and lunchtime than the assistant principal of a middle school? The biggest question relative to behavior that we were hearing from parents is, how will schools individually handle students who are not adhering to the physical distancing requirements? We've outlined this in a pretty detailed fashion in the drafted document. It will vary building to building based on developmental stages. And we focused a lot on the social emotional well-being and awareness of the kiddos and how they are either choosing or not choosing to adhere to social distancing. We've also drafted a document in there for our staff that is utilizing age-appropriate language relative to what they can say to a student who may not be practicing physical distancing. So that's where we would start. And then obviously pulling in parents and administration if we see that the child is struggling in this area. In addition, at the upper levels, which would be considered middle school and high school, Chris Cook and I have been working on a COVID health and awareness plan. So a plan that is designed to be an alternative to consequences should a student really be pushing the limits around not adhering, which they might be. So it's a well-developed plan that Chris has actually been working really hard on and is run out of a Google Classroom for us to be able to utilize at the upper levels for those students. And then the question around lunch was specific to how is that going to look and how are we going to handle that? It will vary based on building. As you've heard from the rollout, high school will not be serving lunch. The middle school and the lower elementary schools will be serving lunch. And it will look a little bit different in buildings. At the middle school level, it will be strictly a grab and go, where those will be delivered to the students prior to that 12:30-ish transition. And then those students that are staying in the building will be moved to safe spaces where they will be able to eat and finish out the remainder of their day, where the elementary will be doing a little bit of a different model and probably utilizing more classroom spaces with a similar grab and go or a lunch style that would not be having students lining up as they typically would to go through a lunch line. So those are all outlined in the document. And I think Lynn was just going to talk about the cafeteria or classroom-based masks for elementary kids.
Yes, for the lunches, I think that's what you're referring to, Jess. For the lunch at the elementary, most students will be eating at their desk, and that first of all, the desks would be cleaned, hands would be washed, student would be seated at the desk, mask could be removed at that time, and they will eat their lunch. When they finish eating their lunch, the face coverings go back on, and then the student will wash their hands one more time. There are situations where we do have students with life-threatening allergies, and for those kiddos, we will be having students, again, spaced 6 feet apart in the cafeteria for those classes that have those students. So that is the plan there. It's going to be a 6-foot distancing at the desk or in the cafeteria for the life-threatening allergy kids. And that's it. And I think it's Keith.
Yeah, look, can I pause there for a moment?
Sure.
I just really wanted to just reiterate some of the points that Lynn is making. Some of the things that we've talked about, and I'm going to be sharing the job description tomorrow night as we've talked about to school committee. We have developed a job description for a health and safety monitor to aid with this type of discussion that will help support children with wearing of masks. The mask coverings have to cover the nose and the mouth. Some people have asked about that. I'm just going to say that again. That's a critical piece to this. But as Lynn pointed out, children for small periods of time can, and staff for breaks, can stand up sometimes to remove a mask for periods of time. We had this happen last week at our retreat. We had 17 or 18 of us in an auditorium with masks on. We wanted to see what it was like for the full retreat. We all wore our masks. It was difficult to hear sometimes, but we made that work. We were there for many hours, spread out. And even though the 6-foot model was in place, we had enough room that we could spread out 10 to 12 feet. There were times when sometimes an administrator might stand up and remove a mask, and that was okay for short periods of time, as Lynn has pointed out. And so this is all part of the training we want to do for students and staff. And another thing we've talked about, which we haven't figured out the schedule yet, but we do have students not starting until a little bit later in September with this new calendar proposal. And we want to have some orientations that students could come into the building maybe in small groups. Again, haven't planned out how it would look, but some of the things that we could teach them is about how to wear the mask properly and how to walk the halls properly, and also some virtual orientation. So that extra time at the beginning of the year is really going to help us with health and safety. And any questions that we didn't get to on this area, we're going to try to develop some FAQs that we'll be starting to add to the website over the next few days and into next week as well. So Keith, want to touch on a few other things?
Yes, there were a number of questions about our cleaning protocols, and we have a number of things that we're doing. One of them is we are proposing to hire additional staff, our own custodians, to aid in that. We've made a commitment to cleaning all bathrooms 3 times during the day when students are there, not just at night. The commonly touched areas like railings and doorknobs, again, those will be wiped down continuously through the day. And that, again, would be from either custodians or the health and safety monitor as well. The drinking fountains, you can't use the bubbler piece, the drinking fountain piece, but we are continuing to install, I believe 2 more went in today, of the bottle fillers that you just take, parents send their children with a water bottle, they can put them under the water bottle filler and that'll fill for them. Classrooms will have either a wall-mounted hand sanitizer in it. If they don't have water, if like a sink in the elementary classrooms, they do have sinks, so it'll be outside the room. So a couple of rooms will share them. So again, we're really approaching this in a fashion of having plenty of both soap and sanitizer around, as well as again increasing our cleaning by a substantial amount during the school day. We've also purchased 20 hand washing stations that'll be put around the schools at different points, more dedicated possibly to the elementary school just because of the amount that they're going in and out of classrooms and the more difficult time that they may have with that. But again, they'll be at all throughout our buildings. So that was one of the major questions. Another one was regarding ventilation, and the questions related to either getting fresh air into the school, into the classrooms. We will be installing in some of our hotter rooms window-based fans that are allowed to do that to bring in more fresh air. We are changing our HVAC system. We're not changing. We are adjusting our HVAC systems to account for 100% fresh air coming in, no refreshed air. Again, these are the guidelines that they're recommending to us. They were one of the things about keeping the buildings or the rooms cool is for the second floor rooms, keeping the windows open at night and keeping our HVAC, can't keep saying it so fast, systems online overnight to, again, bring in as much cool air as possible. There was at least one question about the concern with EEE, but our rooms all our classrooms do have screens in the windows. If they don't, we won't open those windows and replace the screens. So, that's part of the HVAC story there. In addition, there were questions about outdoor time. We have 4 tents on order now, more to be ordered subsequently, as well as chairs for students to be able to spend more time outside, whether it be in a formal classroom setting or for break time or for lunchtime. Again, knowing that the outside is both fresh air, which is a good thing in the COVID world, or just on temperature wise to aid in that. I think that was just about it with regards to the facilities things. I'm just checking. Yes, that's everything there. And I think that's it. So we'll move on to the next one, Dr. Kuska.
Thank you, Keith. And Kelly is going, our student supports director is going to talk about special ed. And I was surprised that we didn't have more questions about special ed, which I think is probably maybe because it's a little bit early to digest the plan. So Kelly's going to talk a few minutes about special ed and be able to cover some of those questions.
Yep, thank you. So actually, the first question that I was going to address was we had several people comment on accommodations through 504 plans for students with disabilities who don't require specialized instruction but do require accommodations, and how that might be accommodated during a hybrid model. So when the student is in person, and receiving their instruction in person, of course, those accommodations would be provided as they typically are, but we will be providing some professional development to staff regarding how some accommodations might look a little bit different, the same accommodation, but how we're going to support the student when the student is remote. I know that sometimes when students are remote and the accommodations are specifically addressing things around executive function, we may need to approach that a little bit differently to make sure they're getting what they need. All of the other questions really did relate to special ed services and students who have IEPs. The first question really, well, there were several questions that asked about how we were going to provide services just in the grand picture, whether the student was in person or whether they were remote, whether they received academic services, whether they received related services such as OT, PT, speech, those kind of things. It's going to be, for most students, it's going to be a combination of both in-person and remote services. For students who really require some assistance to access the services when they are remote, and I'm talking about a student who might be actually in person, but the staff who's providing the service is remote. They are screen timing in. Some students may require assistance from a special educator or a paraprofessional in order to really use that service or access that service with ease. And so they would have staff people who will assist them and support them through that special therapy that they might be having, the speech pathologist or occupational therapist, physical therapist. They had questions about whether staff would be providing services from cohort to cohort to cohort, because many of our speech pathologists move between different groups, and that is not our plan. While a speech pathologist, for example, might house with a particular cohort and be able to provide in-person services to a very small number of students, they will not then be moving to another cohort or another cohort in order to be respectful of not mixing those cohorts. So for some of those students who receive those types of services, some of their services, the staff person will be remotely providing those services to the students, probably in another portion of the building or while they are at home. Staff will be limited for travel between buildings. We do have some special ed staff who go from building to building providing services. I'm thinking in particular of occupational therapists who may work like both at the middle school and at the high school, and we will not be moving between buildings, so we're going to have to have some supports in place for those students to receive their services remotely as well, especially in the beginning when our constraints are greater around those cohorts. A lot of the logistical details are still being worked out and really are quite dependent upon the plan that is finally approved as we move forward. We had some questions about students in self-contained special ed classrooms, and would they be able to for students who have on a part of their program is being able to get out into the community and really to perform some volunteer services or things like that, and would they still be able to do that? It is our plan and our hope that students will still be able to access and move about the community as they would, as noted in their IEP, but it would be in much smaller groups, especially if transportation was required. We really need to be able to follow the guidelines that are listed relative to the seating arrangements that would be in a van. There might be some opportunities that students could be able to walk to or provide outside where the space is safer. So we'll be putting our heads together in order to really think about how we can still provide those opportunities, but in a very safe way. As we do during the school year, we would require parent permission in order for a student to be able to participate and access that type of support. We want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with the kind of support that we're providing given the situation. We had some questions about students who are not identified as high need students, meaning that they don't require full in-person support, but through the hybrid learning model, how are we going to make sure that their IEP is followed? And through some of our professional development that we will be providing, as well as through the work that we did through the spring, I think that we are anticipating that all of the instruction that we'll be providing, whether it be in person or remotely, is going to be of high quality. And we are looking for teachers to really improve their skills in that area through the professional development and the things that they experienced in the spring. So I think that in part, we're going to be talking with parents about what kind of supports their student may need that looks a little different than how it was presented in the spring. We had a lot of students who actually had a lot of skill and ability relative to the curriculum, but their executive function skills, for example, prevented them from being as successful as they typically are when they're in the structure of the school building. So we will be looking to provide things like morning meetings or more frequent check-ins where we are helping the student to lay out the order and the structure of their day or the order and the structure of their week relative to assignments that are due, helping them to use templates, and really hoping to build upon their skills so that were we to go fully remote, they actually are developing skills around that independent use of executive function skills to help manage their time and their activities more independently. I'm not in any way saying that this is an ideal situation, but I do think that there are places where we can really use this to our advantage to build skills when students don't have that support readily available in their learning skills that they can rely upon themselves. We had a question about whether we could provide teachers with FM systems so that students could hear their instructions more clearly. They were worried about voices being muffled by masks, making it difficult, especially when for instruction such as phonics or for students who have hearing impairments. And the thing with FM systems or with amplification in general is that it makes things louder. But unless you have a particular system that is fitted to your type of if you have a hearing impairment fitted to your type of hearing loss, it makes things louder, but it doesn't make things more clear. So I think we're going to have to think about other ways if students are having difficulty understanding what the teacher's saying. And one of those ways might be through clear face masks so that students can see lips and can see students' facial expressions. And we're giving them just more information to grab onto to understand what the instructions are saying. And I think that we'll just become more adept at that as we have to speak through masks. I mean, you know, we've all been doing it now in our own buildings for quite some time, and it's going to be an adjustment. But I don't think the FM systems are the way to go in that regard. We did have a question about asking about the process and timeline for determining services for special ed services and how parents might be involved in that decision-making and planning. We are at present, right now, we are collecting some data that is more concrete relative to high need students. And I did present that the other night in our plan. There are some very specific DESE guidelines that indicate what kind of data we are using to determine whether a student is high need. I think that for the most part, that data is going to really help us develop our list, but there's certainly other nuanced things that we need to take into consideration, and information from both teachers and parents are going to help us weed through that information as well. I think the actual timeline is really dependent upon how quickly we move forward on our approved proposed plan. And there are other factors that impact that as well. But I do know that we want to work with both teachers and with parents in order to determine what that final list might look like. I was thinking there was, I think actually that might be, I think that's it for the special ed questions. I think I hit on everything. If there's other things, then we'll be having additional meetings at the building level that we can certainly address additional concerns at that time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And I did want to touch upon a few things that just did fit in separate categories. Some general questions around what the calendar would look like. And certainly I put that in communication to parents before that, yes, school start date for children will be changing. August 31st at this time is still the start date for teachers. We'll be having about 10 days at the beginning of the year for some of the trainings we talked about, additional PD for staff around what the remote learning portion will be like, because again, we're trying to create a more rigorous remote learning platform than we've ever had to do before, because it does need to be more synchronous and have some more asynchronous activities than what we had been able to do in the spring when we just jumped into a situation that we thought was going to be temporary. So that critical time in the beginning of the year will be really beneficial to all of us, as well as some PD throughout the year. And students will be starting tentatively on September 16th at this time. But again, this is a conversation I'll be having tomorrow night with parents, and more to follow on that once we vote the changes to the calendar. Also, athletics is a question that people had, not too much right now, because I think people did hear in other conversations that September 14th is when the MIAA has agreed that they would potentially start fall sports. And that I still think is subject to change. So we will be awaiting more information from the MIAA. So stay tuned for more information on that. Additionally, lots of questions about childcare from both teachers and parents, as well as extended day program. We are looking into that. Certainly the schools are not able to provide childcare in general for staff and multiple childcare opportunities for parents. But we do understand this is a real difficult time. Having been raised 4 children of my own, I know how challenging it is to try to work full time as a parent, a teacher who has children. So we are looking into ideas, but we can't tell you what they would be right now. So I would just encourage people to do your best to try to find opportunities. And if things do open up, we'll get that information out to you as soon as possible. Extended day, well, in a perfect world, I would love to say yes, we will offer extended day. I can't tell you that right now. We are going to be meeting with our extended day staff and other groups to see if there's an opportunity for that. But as we talked about, safety is our utmost concern here. So if we can do an extended day model in the spaces that we have with the distance in place, get the sanitizing done effectively, then yes, we would consider that. But again, this would probably be late in the summer before we would even know that. And I certainly will get information out as soon as possible related to that. At this time, though, I think it'd be helpful for us to move into questions related to Placentino and Miller. There were a lot of questions around our French immersion program that they're going to focus on, and their buildings in particular as well. So if Jamie Blaney and Dave Kahn could help us with that.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to start off. There was just some questions just in general about Placentino. And when we have our building-based question and answer, I can get more detail into our little ones. But a lot of the questions were, how in the world are you going to teach these little ones to keep 6 feet away and wear a mask? You know, I often get that question of how in the world do you get 20 kindergartners into a room to hang up their backpack and their coat? So the same way, we're going to teach, and model and reinforce, and we're going to have high expectations, and our students rise to it. And developmentally, we're going to really support them in doing that. We're trying to learn from other organizations that have already opened, other preschools in Holliston. We've already contacted them. How's it going? What are you doing? And some of our special education preschools who service some of our children with the most challenges. How's it going? And they've all said, we taught them and they did it. And we know that kids are going to need lots of mask breaks and lots of movement. Under no plan will we expect them to sit in a room for 5.5 hours at a desk. That is not developmentally appropriate. So we're going to build in lots of breaks and movement, and our teachers are amazing. And I joked with them the other night that they've always wanted more recess, and now we get it. We're going to go outside more. So we're going to figure this out together. I don't want you to worry about that. There's been other questions of, so what's the difference between half day and full day? So we fully acknowledge that when we were in crisis teaching, There were a lot of questions around that half day and full day, whether they were different or the same. If you look in the plan at our sample schedules, they're clearly different. Half day is half day and full day is full day. And in the afternoon, just like we have in the past, there'll be more opportunities to deepen learning, and students will go outside, and then they'll also have that asynchronous opportunity for our unified arts. Questions, especially around our youngest learners. How do we ease our children's worry? We weren't able to come into the building. We're going to use our technology and do some virtual tours for you and break down different parts of the day, and you'll be getting them through, and you're going to be able to watch them with your children, and you're going to meet some of the staff as well. And what classrooms are at Adams Middle School? So that will be some classrooms in 1st and 2nd grade, not pre-K and K because they don't have our little bathrooms over there. So we weren't able to do that. And we're really looking at who those students are to make sure that we have a nice cohort of students there. But please know they're still going to be part of our building, even though David Jordan has clearly said, I want to be their principal. I said he can't. And I know. And we're going to, I don't want you to worry about that. They're going to be part of our community. Mr. Bidet, do you want me to share the screen or want me to try? I'll try. Sometimes I fail at this. So Mr. Keim and I think if I go to speaker view, present. Can everyone see that? I can't see you, so I hope you can. We're going to start. I'm going to start by talking. There's some questions around preschool options. So our preschoolers, they're considered a high need population from DESE. So they'll be in school 5 days a week, as will all of our pre-K to 3 students in this model. They'll be following their current model. If they're in AM and PM, we'll be cleaning in between. So there's been some questions around, will there be an opportunity for that all remote option for preschool? So definitely for students who are on IEPs, in order to meet their learning plans, we will. We're going to be collecting interest for that model for our preschoolers who pay tuition. And we're going to see if there's enough interest to form a cohort, and then we would be able to do this. So it's really depending on staffing for that. Another piece is, some people are wondering, well, will that be Montessori or will that be integrated? That will be a preschool remote. It won't be program specific. Other wonders is that if I go remote, will I lose my Montessori spot? No, you won't. You'll be able to maintain that as long as you're still enrolled in the school year, in the school. Lots of questions about French, and I want to really thank Dominique Tretan. He's our K-12 World Language Coordinator. He's the expert in this, so we really reached out to him about what would be best about really getting as much language input as possible. We recognized we had lots of feedback last spring about the remote learning in our French. So for kindergarten in our in-person model, we fully believe that we're able to offer the 100% immersion model. If we move to a hybrid, if the school community decided that we would be hybrid pre-K to 3, or if we needed to move to all of us all remote, we would shift to 50% in French and 50% in English. That helps with their developmental level, while still having a 50% experience synchronously to get that input. At this time, for families who are currently enrolled in French who are choosing the all remote learning option, we will not be offering French. But what we will be saying is that we're going to be utilizing our original registration for French for 1st grade if they want to enter as debutantes. And as you can see, in 1st and 2nd grade, whether we are all remote or in person, that model will continue 100% immersion. But again, if families are choosing an all remote learning option for our 1st or 2nd French immersion, we'd be switching to a 50-50 model where they would have that 2 hours of synchronous learning of French, and the rest would more follow what Miller does in 3rd grade for having English instruction for math and social emotional. In 3rd grade, it's going to look very similar to what it does now. Also wanted to note for grades 1 through 3, if the entire school went hybrid or full remote, those students would be able to join that classroom to be part of in a hybrid model, the remote part of it, or if we're all remote, that part. There'd be that option. Mr. Keim, I believe, is going to talk a little bit about 4th and 5th grade.
So before I do that, hi, everybody. Dave Keim, principal of the Miller School. Good to see everybody this evening. One of the questions was, when we say 3rd grade is going to be all in, like Placentino, pre-K to 2, that does not mean we're not on the Miller schedule. 3rd graders are on the Miller schedule. The Miller School schedule next year is 7:30 until 1 o'clock. Students will be bused home at 1 o'clock and then have an asynchronous opportunity to do one of their unified arts classes at home. But all of grade 3 and half of grade 4 and half of grade 5 will be coming in on a daily basis. So one of the questions was, how will the French look at grade 4 and 5? Will they still get 5 days a week of French instruction? Yes, they will. In our model at Miller, we have half the day in French and half the day in English. So what does that look like? So if we have a cohort A in the building, they might get French instruction in the morning from the French teacher. And in the afternoon, they could get their English instruction from their English instructor. So the teacher will be in the building. So in the cohort B, who's out of school, will get their English instruction in the morning, and they would get their French instruction in the afternoon. So the instruction will be in person live, or it will be synchronous live, but they will get both French and English for half a day, 5 days a week.
And then one other piece of that is that for families who elect for all remote, they would just follow the remote section of that, so they're able to get their French and English 100% of the time remote.
Thank you, Mrs. Slaney.
Yes. Next, I want to talk a little bit about Montessori, the all remote option. So we are not offering a Montessori remote, just like I talked about in preschool. It's going to be a melding of models for remote. And they're going to be in a grade level remote, but that doesn't mean we're not going to have best practices that our Montessori teachers aren't going to share with those teachers. And it's going to be really a melding of best practices that work well for remote. Those students are still going to have their spot in Montessori. We're not going to give those away. And if we went hybrid or full remote, those families could elect for the student to rejoin their Montessori classroom or stay with the remote teacher. Montessori 3 and 4, do you want to talk a little bit about, oh, this is for 3rd graders. If they were to be participating in remote learning, there's going to be a hybrid teacher for Montessori that I believe Mr. Keim's going to talk about.
That's our next slide. So when you have 3rd grade all in, each teacher has 12 students. You also have 4th graders, and there are 12 students in each section. So you would have a cohort A in the building. So at the most, there would be 18 students with the grade 3-4 Montessori teachers. So what we are planning on doing is moving those classrooms to bigger classrooms, like our art rooms, music rooms, gymnasiums, so that they can have 18 students in a classroom. Now, the 6 students from each classroom in 4th grade that are working remotely will have a remote hybrid or a remote teacher working with them. That teacher will be working with the Montessori teachers on what's being instructed each day in their classroom, so that when they do come into school, whichever part they are on the Monday, Tuesday schedule or the Thursday, Friday schedule, they're on the same schedule as all the 3rd graders that are in the building and the other students who had the 4th graders who may have been in school previously. So that is our model for the Montessori. And then Jamie, if you could change the next slide. Some questions came up about whether we would be keeping our content area teachers. And we plan on doing that. And similar in grade 5, because in grade 5, if you don't know, we typically have 2 teacher teams. One does English language arts and social studies, one does math and science, and then they switch halfway through the day. So similar to the French model, you might have an English language arts teacher teaching in person to cohort A in the morning, and then in the afternoon, that cohort would be instructed by the math science teacher, where the math science teacher would teach remotely to the students. Then the ELA teacher would teach remotely in the afternoon, which goes to show that the students will be on a schedule if they are home, because they're going to be on the same schedule as the kids that are in school, so that the teachers can teach them at particular times throughout the day. And then all students will be dismissed again at 1 o'clock so that they can do the asynchronous unified arts lesson at home. Just trying to look at a couple other questions. Somebody asked why, and I think Peter announced this earlier, why not all grade 4 in the building? Or why not, all K through 5? If we went K through 5 all in, I would need 21 classrooms at the Adams Middle School so that we could do 6-foot distancing, 12 kids to a classroom, and that would displace more of the middle school students, and they would be on a totally different schedule. If I went all grades 3 and 4 in, I would need 11 classrooms at Adams Middle School. So I'm just trying to put in perspective, because I know some people had asked those questions. Yes, another question came up, are there going to be a lot of kids coming to the building if parents are driving? Yes, we are going to have to work out those details when that happens. But like in the past, we have always made it work, and we will make it work as the kids come into school on September 15th or 16th, whatever Dr. Kuska had just said. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave and Jamie. I think we're going to move on to talk with our middle school principal and assistant principal.
Hi, everybody. I'm David Jordan, the principal at the middle school. I apologize. I think it's music time at the Jordan house, and there's a bit of a recorder going on in the background. But just to kind of talk a little bit about the elementary school, the creative model that Dr. Slaney and Mr. Kime have stepped forth is, I think, truly innovative and is in alignment with what it is to be part of the Holliston Public Schools. So it's something that I'm really proud of and to be a part of, kind of to make happen. So one of the major kind of question areas was around cohort size. If you notice from this, the team size is roughly, depending on kind of the variation of the percentage of students that are in or out, would be about 88 students. This would be divided up into your cohorts that are split into half. But that does mean that the 4 core teachers, your math, social studies, science, English teacher, and the co-educator, which may be a paraprofessional, a unified arts teacher, a special educator, are still rotating through those 4 different classrooms in both cohorts A and cohorts B. There is the possibility to kind of reduce that size if we need to. It just reduces the teacher. It causes teachers to teach outside of their content area potentially. In this model, at 44 students, which would be 4, in the building at a given time, would be 4 classes of 11. we still have teachers that are rotating through each one of those locations. Let's see. This is our schedule, and kind of there's asked to kind of provide a little bit more clarification on here. Built in here, we have some assumed breaks that aren't necessarily noted on the schedule, but are kind of built in and will be at the discretion of the team to kind of figure out where exactly that would be built in. Additionally, you'll see that Unified Arts is in the afternoon. That's the 1:30 to 2:33. That is done remote. That could be remote from the building, or it could be remote at home. Additionally, we are looking for opportunities for PE, chorus to be done remote or in the outside when kind of weather is permitting. We do, if you look at the 12 to 12:42, this is where we're offering AS is kind of academic services. This is where we're offering kind of world language. And as I had indicated in the first presentation, world language is paired with a cohort and kind of quarantines there for a period of time so that they have live in-person world language. Additionally, there is a unified art teacher that will be paired with a team and they will rotate through that team in 4-week blocks so that they can offer in-person unified arts and then kind of can continue to rotate through that. We are looking to get really creative as far as clubs. So we look at kind of like that extra help time. That would be also an opportunity to offer some virtual clubs. Obviously, we can explore some outside clubs and some things there, but we are still looking to offer some of the same opportunities that we have, which we did in the spring in our remote learning environment there. As far as what we plan to teach, we do know that, education is going to look very different, but we are going to follow state guidelines, and we are going to do the best we can to kind of create a really creative learning environment. Mrs. Beatty, did you have anything to add?
No, I think the only other question was around a slow phased-in approach, similar to what probably Nicole Bottomley will talk about. And that certainly is something that we are considering and are going to be looking into relative to using the first week or so to not jump so quick into academics, but really acknowledging the social emotional well-being of the kids that are returning to us and meeting them where they're at. We have some summer work being done by our staff relative to workshops and some sessions that kids will be attending both remotely and in person, as well as stuff for our staff.
Yeah, built here is a plan that we really want our teachers to get their hands on and provide some flexibility and some autonomy kind of built in. They are the experts as far as the curriculum and the teaching that's here. This is a framework that they can live in, that we can live in as a district, we can live in as a school, that can evolve fluidly as we move from full and hybrid, full remote. This is a schedule that can handle it.
Yep.
So thank you. With that, I'll move it over to Mrs. Bottomley.
Thank you very much. Are you still sharing your screen there? Thank you. I just don't want to confuse anyone with the RAM schedule when I talk about the high school schedule, so I appreciate that. So I'm going to be pretty brief this evening, not because I don't want to answer questions, but because the large majority of questions that came in have already been covered this evening. So there were a number of questions about cleaning procedures and health and safety. I think Ms. Bowler did a really nice job answering. There were a number of questions about our building facility and the heating system, the HVAC system, as well as cleaning protocols that Mr. Boudet went through. So I don't want to be redundant in those answers. And then the third category in terms of a number of questions was really around what that remote learning platform looks like. And Dr. Patello did a really nice job of going through at the beginning what remote learning looks like across the board and some examples that were really specific to different types of instructional practices. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of questions that are really specific to the high school that came up. One question was about band and chorus, wellness classes, classes that might look a little bit different or might be a little bit more hands-on. So I do want to just mention that the state released guidance for courses requiring additional safety considerations that really spell out the parameters around chorus, singing, musical theater, different types of instruments that are played, non-musical theater, physical education, shared spaces, supplies, labs, all of those different pieces. So I do want to point that out. That's on the Department of Education website. And so there's a lot of specific information there if you're looking for something that is really particular to a class or a type of activity. Because the questions came in about band and chorus, I do want to mention that band and chorus is allowed outdoors with a distance of 10 feet with masks on. So we will be looking at how we can support our students who are very dedicated to band and chorus and how we can still maintain those course offerings. I have been in communication with our chorus teacher in particular around singing and what opportunities are available for that. So that is a work in progress, but we are very much committed to maintaining our offerings, not just in terms of band and chorus and wellness, but across the board for our program of studies and our different electives and core courses that we offer. Another question came in just really about the start of the school year. And I know I mentioned on Monday night in the presentation, and it was also in our larger document that was posted on the Holliston Public Schools website. I had mentioned the phased in approach in terms of beginning this school year in remote learning for everyone. And I know I mentioned 1 to 2 weeks. I got a lot of questions after, assuming that that was sort of a full 2 weeks. And I apologize if there was any miscommunication on my part about that. The 1 to 2 weeks is really because we're not quite sure the exact start date yet for students. And I know Dr. Kreska talked about working with school committee tomorrow night to establish what that school year calendar will look like. So it may be that depending on the first day of the school year for students, that some of that remote learning wraps into the second week. And that was really my intention on Monday night. If we are able to start, for example, if students start on the Tuesday of that week, and I don't even know the date off the top of my head, but if we were to start then, we would be looking at potentially 2 days of remote learning for everyone in cohort A, followed by 2 days of remote learning for everyone in cohort B. And so I just want to clarify that because I think there, for parents and for community members, there is definitely a big difference between 4 days versus 2 full weeks. And I understand where some of the questions were coming from. Again, I don't want to commit to a particular number of days because we do have to see how the calendar works out. That being said, there was a lot of feedback from teachers and from students on the planning-based committee, as well as a lot of conversations that we had about how critical it is to start those first few days with remote learning. We know that we'll have some students that are in remote learning for the full year. We also know that as we're working on a hybrid model, roughly 50%, and again, that's not an exact number, but roughly 50% will be in person and the other 50% will be in remote learning. So to start everybody in that remote learning model for those first few days really does allow teachers to use the best possible instructional practices looking at remote learning to meet all students together, for all students to feel like they have a solid peer group within that class or within their classes, and to really go over norms and expectations for remote learning, as well as norms and expectations when they do come into the classroom. It's an opportunity, as I just mentioned previously, that some of the classes, for example, band or chorus or potentially ceramics or wellness, are going to look a little different than what is typically the case when we're not looking at restrictions on physical distancing or movement or sharing supplies. So it's really important for students to have an opportunity to ask those questions, for teachers to have an opportunity to go over what students can expect when they come into that classroom, and to have an opportunity to do it together as a cohort. It's also an opportunity for teachers to really orient students to their online materials that they are going to be using, and again, really set those norms and expectations. In addition to the most important, which is really establishing relationships. Again, this is a complicated situation. Our teachers are phenomenal, and I have no doubt that they are going to do a fantastic job with students. But I also want to make sure that we're setting teachers up for success from day one as well, and having them start with all students in that remote environment for the first few days really allows them to start successfully with students and start establishing those relationships before the cohorts are split. So that was a question I received a few of those. Also, in terms of the bell schedule, there was a question just about the dismissal and transition to home at 12:43. And again, looking at the requirements and guidelines from the state regarding the capacity of our buses, as well as having conversations about the finances and availability in terms of additional spots or drivers or buses, it's not feasible to do a bus run at 12:43 for the middle and high school, so that bus run would come later in the day. That being said, the large majority of students will be transitioning at 12:43 back home. For those students who are taking the bus a little bit later or are not able to, we are going to be able to provide some spaces around the building, some outdoors, some indoors, where they will be able to remain until they take their bus transportation home later on in the day. Again, we're not serving lunch in the school. We are doing a grab and go option for students who are transitioning home who need that, or for those students who need to remain until the bus at 3 o'clock. I received another question or another few questions about the grading system at the high school as well. There was a question as to whether or not classes would be graded on a pass-fail or credit, no credit system as they were in the spring during crisis teaching. We are going to be issuing letter grades or standard-based grades depending on the course and what's appropriate. So I just wanted to answer that because that came in quite a few times. And other than that, all of the questions that I received, as I stated before, were along the lines of health and safety and other pieces that have already been answered this evening.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate that. So I do want to talk briefly just before we transition to our school committee portion of the meeting. I know some of our parents may just be tuning in for this portion for the question and answer piece before our school committee meeting. So I wanted to just touch on a few things tonight before we transition. One of them is I really wanted to say I thank you so much to the administrative team for the creative thinking that they put into this plan. Again, there's still a lot of work to do, and it's not easy to do any of these things, but we were tasked by the Commissioner of Education to come up with a plan that included thinking behind what would it look like if we do an all remote model? What would it look like to do a hybrid model? Or what would it look like to do full in person? When we found that 3 feet was the option if we did it in person to get all of our students or most of our students in, and more guidance came out, 3 foot did not become an option as far as we feel for our school system and our children. Truly, the 3 foot model did not seem safe, and more guidance came that made us feel that we were correct in that. So that led us to the hybrid model that we've come up with to share with you the past few nights. And there's a lot more work that has to go into it, but I wanted to have you understand that the easiest thing to do right now is to say we're all going remote. And that could happen within this continuum services. And we have to put a lot of work into planning for that unforeseen situation. So that is subject to change. And I don't want to tell parents that would not happen to start the year because things could change at any time. We do have more meetings with the commissioner, more guidance will be coming, and we will certainly keep parents updated as soon as we know more information. And I also don't want parents to feel like if their question may not have been touched upon. Again, we received well over 500 questions just from parents in the last few days. So certainly we tried to get them and group them together, but we may not have hit on everything. And I really do think it's going to be even more critical in the next few weeks if we can have our smaller communities of parents in the school-specific meetings. And what that looks like remains to be seen at this time. But I do want to promise you that we will be putting some meetings together. And that way parents will have more specific to each building and the central office team there as well. And as we transition over to you, Stacy, to open up your school committee portion of the meeting, I want to just suggest that if we could start the meeting with any specific questions related to maybe what the principals could answer at the beginning, and then I'll be happy with my central team to stay on for the remainder of your portion.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, I know on behalf of the committee, we echo what Dr. Kuska just said, and I'm not going to say it again, but that was well said, Dr. Kuska. So this evening we are going to continue on with our school committee meeting. It's 6:30 p.m. and I have already discussed with Susan that I would like to do a hard stop by 8 o'clock tonight. That's not to diminish any discussion, but there's a lot going on. This is mentally exhausting, and I think we could spend all night going down the rabbit hole of details. So I'm going to open the floor for questions from the committee. I would ask you to consider the questions that we ask the administrators. We still should be thinking and talking at that 30,000 foot area. This is a framework that has been presented to us, and the devil's in the details. So there are a lot of details that we don't have the answer to. So I just want people to be mindful and sort of respectful of that. So that being said, I am going to scroll through my pages because I only have one number on the first one. And you're the only one on my first page. Do you have any questions that you want to start off with?
Sorry, I think you called on me. I'm not sure. You kind of broke up in the middle of that. You want me to speak now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think I've absolutely thanked you before, but this is truly a comprehensive plan, and I appreciate the thought and the detail that went into it. I have a few questions, and one of them relates to decision-making if at some point we need to either roll back to fully remote, or when are we ready to go to welcoming all of our students back? And I just need to, I think, understand a little better if we have benchmarks, what those are, and who are the people who are going to be making decisions about whether we roll back. Obviously, the governor and Department of Education may have a hand in it, but at the local level, who are the people that we're going to consult, and what are we going to look at specifically?
I think the easier part to talk about would be what would lead us to full in-person.
Sure.
Certainly that would be a lot of guidance from the governor and the Commissioner of Education, and they'll release more guidance on safety at that time, the Mass DPH. So I feel like that's going to be very prescribed from the state, and all of those restrictions as they start getting, certainly when travel restrictions start getting less restrictive, when more businesses open and all of those things, and the less need for social distancing, that will allow us to move to the more in-person model that we would love to embrace for the school year. Who knows if that will happen. But as far as the transition, if it gets more restrictive, there is a process in place for that. And Lynn, could you speak briefly to that as far as what would lead us to move in that direction? It's not very simple, it's complex, but there are certainly criteria, and we would involve the emergency staff with Chief Cassidy and the Board of Health in that process as well.
And that's exactly right. We would absolutely be involving our Board of Health. If we have a single case of COVID-19 and we did need to quarantine a classroom, that's something that would be reported to the Board of Health. And more than likely, if we had to do some cleaning, I would say a school might be closed for a day or so, but it all depends on the amount, on the tracing and the amount of people, students, staff that could be involved. If we have multiple cases within a building, then that again goes to the Board of Health and our infectious disease nurse, who will do a lot of tracing for us to figure out, again, the extent. But if we have multiple people, students, staff involved in a certain building, and it spreads to other schools as well, I could see that the district would close for a period of time until the virus is mitigated and safe to return. So it is a very complex model, but it's all very circumstantial depending on where the cases are and the amount of students or staff that are involved. And then we go by the direction of our Board of Health.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I understand that it's certainly a moving target, and it really depends wildly based on, which cohort of students is in the building and which one isn't. My second question right now is related to and I want to make sure I understand this correctly, and I'm going to get the ages wrong, so I'm going to use grades, the third grade, fourth grade Montessori split at Miller. The fourth graders are going to be attending? Is that correct?
They will be a part of the cohort. So there'll be third graders and half the fourth graders, because the fourth graders will be in a hybrid like
Okay.
all the other, but they will still be a class. But the fourth graders will be in on that hybrid schedule like all other fourth graders are.
Okay.
We have big enough rooms. We've got our art room, music room, our gymnasium that can house 18 or more students, so that they will be at 6 foot distance, but that would allow all the third graders to be in, and there's, half the fourth graders on any given day.
Okay. I must have been reading after 10 o'clock and getting a little sleepy. I misunderstood that before. Thank you for the clarification. That's it for now, Stacy. Thank you.
Okay, Lisa?
Thanks. Thank you to everybody, echoing what everyone else has already said. I'm hearing a lot of positive responses from the community, and I know this was a tremendous amount of work. So a big thank you to all the administrators, whether central office or school-based, that worked on this, because this was a giant effort. One thing, let me preface my question by saying I think it's really important to underscore something that Dr. Kuska opened up with an hour and a half ago. And that is that this is a starting point. I think what I'm hearing on social media is people think this is the plan. And I'm glad that people are responding positively to this plan. But right now, this is the beginning of the conversation. We don't know exactly how we're going to pay for this. We don't know if we can pay for all of this. We have not budgeted this out. We haven't gotten approval from the teachers union. So, and I know this has been said, but I think it bears repeating, just based on the responses that I'm hearing from people, both by email and by social media, to please understand that, this is the beginning of the conversation this week. This is not the end. So with that, I want to ask one kind of specific question, and then I'm actually going to, Stacy, you wanted mile-high questions. I actually have a 5-mile-high question, but let me ask my specific question first. I'm wondering if there's any way to consider for recess allowing, putting kids into smaller pods so that they can interact more, because that's one thing I've seen with, my son's in ESY this summer, and I know recess has been so frustrating for some of the kiddos because they can't even touch, they can't even toss a ball back and forth. And I'm wondering if there is some way for us to consider forming, even smaller cohorts that would be able to play together. And I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't need an answer tonight, but that's just something I kind of wanted to throw out there because I realize that's a very specific detail. But something that I thought, I think might make recess go a little bit better. And then my 5-mile-high question is, what is the process going to be for us after this week? I know that we are hoping to vote on this as a school committee tomorrow. But as I said, as has been repeated, I know by multiple people a few times, there's quite a process to go. What can parents expect? And I guess this is really a question for Dr. Kuska. What can parents expect over the rest of August and into September in terms of next steps? I assume that once the school committee votes on this plan, hopefully tomorrow night, it will be sent to the state by the August 10th deadline. But then what can people expect from there? When are we going to have, give us a little bit of information, if you could, on what you think the budget process and then the union negotiation piece will look like in very broad terms. I know that, there's a lot that we don't know yet, but if you could just in very broad terms kind of tell people what to expect over the next month as we tweak and hone in on what the actual plan is going to be.
Sure. So yes, as you said, it's a moving targets that are unknown at this time. And what we have put together is what we feel is feasible for safety, for social emotional well-being, for physical safety, for health reasons, based on all the guidances that we've received and based on our transportation. So all of those things playing into this model at this time, and in this moment, we believe it's feasible for us to offer this for our students. So the next steps for us, there are a couple of things that school committee could be doing tomorrow night. They could vote on the model, knowing that the model is going to DESE, but also state in the vote that the model They're voting on the proposed model. However, they know it's subject to change based on finances and things like that. And then we would submit the model knowing that we could still come back to school committee later because we didn't get to make the financial impact that we thought we could make with our town budget. And we would come back and revise that with you and then resubmit it to DESE. So there are options within that, or the school committee could say, we're not ready to vote this model at all. But I think one doesn't have to be contingent upon the other, because even if tomorrow night you voted on it, because we don't have the collective bargaining in place and the impact of those decisions, that could still change the model. And that's just an honest answer to parents. There are just pieces to the puzzle that have to happen, but the timeline is still in place for the state. The state is looking to see that we've applied all the expectations that the commissioner did place upon superintendents with the information that they shared with us. And I know that this could come back to you more than once. We could vote again in August, late August. We could vote again in September. But the important part is that if the proposed plan goes forward, it still means at any time we can jump into the remote portion or the in-person portion later, and we wouldn't necessarily have to re-vote it at that time if those components are already in there. And I know we have some meetings planned with our budget subcommittee to see if we can make some concessions to the budget to help with some of the staff that we're going to be asking for. I do think it might be possible, but again, it's still unknown at this time. We do have some funds in place from our CARES Act and different things that will help with some of the resources, and Keith and I have been talking about that. So that is also part of that discussion with our budget subcommittee. And that will happen very quickly, that piece. The union negotiations part, I can't speak to the timeline on that, but we'll work with them as much as possible.
Thank you. And just so people know, we will be talking, we're going to start the budget conversation in budget subcommittee on Friday. So that is on our radar, but you know, it's going to be quite a conversation. It's a lot of work to be done, mostly by Mr. Boudet. Lots of number crunching. That's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Dawn?
Thank you. My questions, I guess it's somewhat directed towards Nicole in terms of the high school model. There are 4 blocks with our scheduling, and only 3 of them in the hybrid model, they'll come in and do live. And the 4th block is remote, correct? It's kind of a 3/4 hybrid model, 1/4 remote consistently. We've worked DSB into that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And during that DSB period, are we offering chorus and band outside? Is that how you were talking about the 10 feet outside, weather permitting? Is that going to happen during DSB, or we're not sure yet?
It is the goal to maintain that. That's when band and chorus typically meets. So it is our goal to maintain those course offerings during the directed study block. I'm in conversations with our chorus teacher, and I will be speaking with our band teacher in the next day or two. They have been pretty active in reviewing the guidelines that came out from the state and the particular parameters, and the state guidelines get pretty specific to even the different types of instruments and you know what can and can't be used in various settings. So they are really great educators and have a real vested interest in making sure that they can support these offerings for students. So that is my goal. We're not there yet, but that is definitely my goal.
Okay. I have some concerns about the phased-in approach at the high school level, and I just want to know if there's any flexibility in this in terms of, I see 4 different schools doing something a little differently, right? We have our full in-person for pre-K through 3rd. For 4th through 8th, we have what I would call almost a true hybrid. And at the high school, it's almost like a 3/4 hybrid. So we're already losing some of that in-person face time. Could you consider, or is there a way to bring those kids in for that in-person time? Because we may lose that if the numbers go up, if we have to pivot into remote in October. And I have some real concerns about waiting until the end of September and then only getting them in 50% of the time, 3/4 of the time. But could there be some room here where we might have high school classes without any remote students? I mean, we don't actually have a number now other than approximately 20% over all of the district. And maybe we do. Maybe there's 14 10th graders that want to go remote. But it's entirely possible that some of these classes won't have a single remote student and that we could offer them in person. Or alternatively, if a class only has 2, 3, or 4 remote students, would it make sense to set up a Zoom with just those 3 or 4 students to have a more personal experience? We've all been on a Zoom call now for almost 2 hours and there's 24 of us. It's not a real personal experience. So my concern about a phased-in approach at the high school is that if we're doing it for the benefit of the students to kind of put them all out there and get to know them, that might be more effective if we brought the 10 to 12 of them in for in-person and set something up, whether it's 2 students or 4 students on remote. Just a consideration for it. I'm trying to get I'm trying to really understand why we would want to phase in at the high school, because I am highly concerned that we'll lose more in-person days.
Then for a second, I hear what you're saying, Dawn, and Nicole's certainly welcome to chime in as well. But hearing Nicole tonight, it's not necessarily 2 weeks. I think what I'm hearing to her, it might be for kids that are in a hybrid cohort already, it potentially could be 2 additional remote days in that first week. So that's still to be determined a little bit, but I hear your concerns with that. But also staffing does impact some of this, because if we have those smaller remote cohorts of maybe 4 children, I understand to be able to offer them some opportunities, electives and things might be a great idea, but would limit our opportunity to get enough staff in front of students to do the cohorts and spread the students out. So I think a lot does go into that. And I don't know, Cole, anything else you want to add?
What I would add is that when we begin the hybrid model, we know that 50% or more students will be in remote for every block. So I agree with you that we don't know the percentage of students who will remain remote the entire year or potentially the first part of the year, depending on medical needs. And that number, based on the parent guardian survey that went out to the community, was around 20%, give or take. I don't know what that number will end up being for students who they and their families elect to be home 100% of the time. But what I do know is in a hybrid model, we can have 11 students in the typical classroom. And so there will be, on average, 50% of the students in remote learning at any given time. So, we're starting out those first few days meeting the needs of all students by having them all together in that remote learning environment was something that, we spent a lot of time on and considered in terms of how to make sure that those students who would be starting out remote do not feel as if they're marginalized, do not feel as if they're an afterthought, and do not feel as if they're left behind. But of course, this is all, as Lisa said, the start of a conversation, right? And so, I really welcome the feedback from the faculty, from the high school faculty. I welcome the feedback from the students. Our building-based planning team consists of 25 educators and 15 students. Amazing kids. And their feedback and what it feels like to them to be in remote learning versus in person has been invaluable. The feedback that we have received from the teachers around instructional practices has been invaluable. And I do want to mention Tom Reeve, who's our tech integration specialist, who is pretty amazing at what he does. He really is. He has been running a course for educators at the high school this summer, and we have approximately 20 educators who are enrolled in that course, and it's a remote learning course to really go over the best practices for remote learning and different instructional methods. And that has been going incredibly well. And there's a lot that we've learned from that course and a lot of feedback from educators in that course too about the benefits of really utilizing the best of those methods to start the class off together before splitting them into that hybrid model. But all of this is new to all of us, right? So it is definitely something that we're navigating, and as many people have said, with additional guidance on a regular basis from the state and with feedback from teachers and parents, guardians, and students, we adjust our practices as we move forward. And I know Dr. Patella wanted to comment as well.
I just wanted to chime in on the concept of phase-in district-wide. I think that the proposal does, ask that we strongly consider some kind of phase in across the district. I think the reason we're proposing that is from some of the more successful international examples, one of the strong recommendations that came out of those other countries was to phase kids in. And so that could, the way that it was outlined, but it put it forth as a kind of possibility. I think we need to flesh this out more through conversations here and through conversations with our faculty and community, is, the concept of perhaps say like the oldest grade in each school, that cohort of kids coming back first. So it might be, second grade at Placentino, fifth grade at the Miller, eighth grade. And then, so you're not taking all of your cohort one back at once. And the purpose for that is to be able to, navigate these complex waters of this, the safety and health protocols that we're putting forth with a smaller group of kids. Now, we've certainly done that with a very small group of kids in our extended school year. And I think that puts us at an advantage over some communities that did not do that. But this idea of phasing it in, and the purpose is not to disrespect the great desire what we certainly have to have kids in person and how valuable that time is, but to better enable us to make sure that we don't have to go backwards by not taking into account the complexity of what this is going to look like in order to bring kids back safely. So, again, we put that forth as a possibility in the proposal. I think that could look differently, but I think I would, again, I think we're strongly recommending that is a phase in, not just at the high school, but across the district is considered for the long-term, success of this, of more in-person learning that we're trying to push for in Holliston, while again, putting safety first at the same time.
My next question was about, and I think somebody addressed this briefly before, we asked about flexibility in pivoting between your selected program, whether it's remote or hybrid back to remote. And there was some suggestion that we might have specific dates 3 or 4 times a year. There are some school districts that are asking families to commit by a certain date, but then they might have a little wiggle room within a period. One of the great things I like, my understanding of how this is being proposed, is that there is, for the hybrid kids and kids that are going remote, that there is a live stream, at least at the middle school and high school, that they will be able to hear the synchronous instruction. And so they're not just trying to teach themselves half the curriculum, whether it's with project-based learning or on their own asynchronously. One of the things that I like about that is the kid that wakes up with a headache, isn't really sure where this is going, has a parent that's considering going in for a test, they can still live stream in, and hopefully we can get families to really abide by our concerns that we need to keep people healthy. So I guess my question is more, are we going to be flexible and allow kids to pivot between hybrid and remote?
I think the biggest challenge for that is the in-person piece, probably, even though both could be challenging based on staffing and numbers. But certainly, if a parent chooses to have their child full remote for whatever health reasons or otherwise, and then starts feeling more comfortable that they could send their child back to the in-person more often, particularly at the elementary level, then you might have a situation where we are locked in for certain numbers because we can only have so many in the class for that 6-foot distancing. So that would mean we'd have to have a little bit of time to think through how to bring them back safely. And that's why it's not a perfect science for that. I do think the remote portion, if it was the opposite, does allow us a little bit more flexibility, but we still have to keep numbers in mind because there are expectations for teachers and keeping with the number constraints for them for the support that they're giving online as well. So it's going to have to be a little bit of a case-by-case basis. It does offer a little bit more flexibility, but it's not as perfect as we would like. And I think David Jordan was going to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Don, once they're associated with the cohort, especially at the middle school, if they're moving within their cohort, like the A and the B, like if a kid is sick or if a parent is just nervous and wants to keep them home to get tested, And just kind of in that, and we're talking about like a couple days here and there. Since we're synchronous, regardless of the day, they can still kind of jump into their class at that point.
My last question is one, it might be directed towards Dan, or at least just to float it out there. We talked, I think Kelly Camp talked about a system that required microphones, and the name is escaping me. But is there just simple microphones that we could also use in some of the classrooms, that we could also sync with the Chromebook or whatever's allowing us to do the live stream instruction, so that you have a teacher teaching 11 kids in a classroom and she's wearing a mask or he's wearing a mask, and we want to make sure it's audibly picked up for the live stream. Would microphones assist with that? And maybe kids can wear the earbuds, the AirBuds, and we could, it would improve the audio for the remote kids.
I did ask Keith to look into a little bit of that for pricing. Obviously, that's a budgetary impact as well. So I don't think in our current, we're trying to put together some numbers for you for our budget subcommittee meeting on Friday. And I don't think we've actually calculated what that expense could be. But maybe on a limited basis might be available, but I don't think it would be on a large basis for many teachers. But Keith, do you have any more on that? No, nothing more to add. We are looking into it, but that would be an additional expense that we haven't factored in.
Dan, did you want to respond to anything either?
Sure. We are looking at a classroom level speaker. We've looked at a couple different models. We found one that could serve as a sort of like a conference room phone, but it captures audio from students that are in the classroom that would allow students that are remote to hear better. So we're still looking at plenty of options, but we did find one we really like.
Thank you. While I'm switching my screen to find my other school committee members, Nicole and David, can you share the rationale behind, in the hybrid model, not having the students in school for the full 5.5 hours for learning time? Because I, along with many others, are really struggling with this. They're going to school for most of the day and then leave and then log on again afterwards. I'm help us with that.
Sure. I think there's two main factors for the high school, and it may be different at the middle school. In terms of the high school, I think really the most significant factor is that we just really, frankly, don't have the space to accommodate the numbers of students at lunch safely with the physical distancing and masks off. And the health and safety is really our driving force in everything we're doing. And we just really don't feel that at the high school at this current time, we can safely accommodate everyone for lunch. In addition to that, so once we determined that, then we looked at different bell schedules and models that we thought would give the best learning experiences for students and for teachers. And there are some real benefits that come out of having that last block be a remote learning block, very similar to what I was describing in terms of those first couple of days with having everybody remote. So the idea of having that last block be a remote learning block allows for all students to be together. We would still be maintaining our 4-day rotating block schedule. So for example, if it's an A day, A, B, C, D, D would be the last block of the day. If it's a B day, B, C, D, A would be the last block of the day. So it will not be the same class that is in that remote learning every day. And I think that's an important piece to highlight. We will still be maintaining our regular rotation schedule. It allows for all students in that class, because we are in the hybrid model where we're splitting roughly 50% in and 50% remote learning. It allows that one block a day for everybody to be together and for the teacher to utilize different instructional practices for that. Also for students who are, who are home, who are remote for the entire year, it again gives that opportunity to feel connected to their course and to their class. One of the things we felt really strongly about at the high school was, again, maintaining the integrity of the course offerings for students. And so we did not want to drastically change our program of studies or drastically change our bell schedule at the expense of those learning experiences and at the expense of those course offerings. So again, once we determined that we could not safely or feasibly serve lunch to students and accommodate those numbers, then we started looking at what instructional practices can match up to the health and safety guidelines. And that is where we determined that we would have 3 blocks as well as directed study block during the day in person. And then that last block of the day would be a remote learning block.
And Stacy, we are running the full day. So we would at like 12:40, 12:43, depending on where we fit our lunch transition, there'll be grab and go lunch, or students who have brought their lunch and choosing to stay for the day. They'll eat their lunch and have a flex. And then at 1:30, they'll engage in like a 1 hour and 10 minute asynchronous unified arts class at that point. Families can choose at the 12:43 to dismiss their students, which would amount to about 3 different dismissal times for us. So you would have like a pickup at 12:43 at that point in time, or you would have a group that would stay and eat lunch, and then there would be a 2:33 dismissal for pickup, and then there would be a bus dismissal at 3.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you both for that. Cynthia.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to just get right to it because I know we have press for time. So this one was just a comment that Dave Keim is going to have some new diagrams for drop off and pickup. There's going to be quite a bit of traffic at the those loops. So I just wanted to comment on that. I'm curious this is a question for David Jordan, about the cohorts at Adams. Are you talking about having, say, like the French immersion students would share one classroom cohort? Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah. So we, and granted, like say if you're focusing just on 6th grade or 7th grade,
yeah,
because it's a large group, so it's more than 11 students, but we would be putting them on one team, and then the French immersion teacher would be associated with that team.
Got it. Okay,
thank you. But the larger team of 88, and then we would be consolidating them into like 11 cohorts.
Right. So it's like cohort A, section 1, right? So it's A1, right? Okay, got it. Yeah. All right, thank you. I'm also, this is for you and for Nicole, I'm just thinking about the middle school and high school because they're sort of just doing grab and go for lunch. They're ending their day or they're not having lunch at all. Is there going to be time, the passing time is like 10 minutes and they're supposed to wash their hands, get to class, and then also somewhere, is there a time for them to have a snack, or is that something they would do before DSB? Or I don't know how you envision that scene, but I feel like that's a long day for them to go and then maybe take the bus home potentially and be home at 1:15 or so without having anything. Just a thought.
Yeah. So, sorry, you want to go first, David? No. Okay.
Okay.
I'm in. So our students are used to having 4 minutes of passing time in between classes. So 10 minutes is a pretty significant increase as far as what they're used to. 10 minutes, it is possible that throughout the year we could need to adjust based on feedback and based on living the model. But we feel pretty good about the 10 minutes. Again, sort of looking at the difference in terms of what they already have. Our students now snack all day long. That's pretty typical teenage behavior.
Yeah.
Although I would probably put myself in that category too, not the teenage category, but the snacking. So, we are going to have to figure out how to help support and accommodate those behaviors that are very normal, typical, important behaviors. Okay. Increasing the passing time, allowing for additional outdoor spaces, because we already are very fortunate to have our courtyards and some other spaces that aren't necessarily protected yet by tents, but that's a work in progress. Okay. But we, so we will be increasing our outdoor, availability. We'll have additional time for passing. So I don't anticipate that being a problem. That being said, those are the details that we could spend days really figuring out the logistics of, and we have been spending those days figuring out the logistics of every possible thing you can imagine. So, you know, I have no doubt that it will be seamless. We just have to put those parameters into place. But, you know, that's what we're used to with our students kind of snacking throughout the building, and we'll just help them with particular guidelines for when it's appropriate and where, but we will absolutely support that.
Okay.
And then our middle school schedule, even like currently, it's kind of built like a framework, and then the team of 4 teachers kind of flexibly oftentimes uses that time based off of the needs of the students. So they'll build in where those breaks will fall, where it makes the most sense for that. They are not going to be transitioning amongst classrooms. They're going to be staying in a fixed space. But we, in kind of preliminary conversations, we'll have safe spaces, both indoors and outdoors, where they can kind of move students there as well. But we're trying to kind of provide, once we create like a good framework for the school day, our teams will then provide flexibility where they do that currently, like where they're going to fit in snack and where they're going to have their transition.
Okay. This actually is a question for Lynn Bowler. You keep referencing, or you reference many times, face coverings. I'm wondering whether the department is going to be offering us some specific guidance on what will be considered a face covering that is, I don't know, appropriate or approved, and whether we'll be disseminating that information to parents so parents can purchase, you know, cloth masks or whatever it is they want to, or disposable masks, et cetera. But I feel like we need more specific details so we can kind of plan for that and have enough, and that they need to be washed every day and worn over the face and mouth and all of that stuff.
Right. So face coverings, and that's the way we're referring to them, and not masks. They usually, the norm is, and CDC will have that too, and we can send out some more information. We actually have some PowerPoints put together, nursing has, for staff and staff and parents in regards to them. And there's usually a double fabric, 2 layers of fabric, and it has to be enough to cover the nose and mouth. And those are the guidelines that we have. And we do have lots and lots and lots of face coverings at the schools, both for adults, which would probably be grade 4 and up, and students. But we do have some PowerPoints put together that go into some of the PPE as well.
Okay.
And Lynn, I think if a child did not come to school with what we felt was a proper PPE, we would then offer them a substitute for that.
Right, and we'll have some located at various places throughout the school. We'll probably have them at the entrances as kids come in if they don't have one on them, or if something gets soiled, where I'm thinking at the entrance, the counselors' offices could have them, and maybe the main office. We just want to discourage the kids coming into the nurse's office for items like that, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's it for me right now, Stacy. Thank you.
Catherine.
Hi, so thank you for answering about 100 of my questions that I had coming in tonight. I still have 100 more, but I think only one of them really fits into the 30,000 foot criteria. So I'll go with that one for the moment. We've heard that you're working on creating the cohorts so that you're taking into consideration the students' needs and, you know, what building they're going to go to. In terms of just scheduling, like family life scheduling, do we have a projected, although probably not hard, fast date as to when you're going to ask parents to decide if they're going to go remote or if they're going to go hybrid or in person or whatever is their situation? And is there a time when we can expect to know, or projected to know, what cohort our child or children will be in, so that we can try to make adjustments in our lives?
That's a little tough to determine right now. I would optimistically like to hope that within a couple of weeks that could happen, but that date is still to be determined, because as I mentioned, the pieces that are still have to be bargained and still have to be determined financially and things do play into that. But certainly we really do know how important that is for parents to try to get a sense of what their life is going to look like, if at all possible. So the sooner we can get to that, I mean, that's our goal as well. And as soon as we do have that information, we would get it out immediately. But I wish I had a better timeline than that. But I know it's not. I know it's not going to be next week, and more than likely not the week after.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. And honestly, some of it comes from my kids who are asking, like, who's my teacher next year? I don't know yet. And they have a lot of questions, and, you know, I don't expect to have all the answers, but these are the things that I'm hearing even from them, because, you know, all the back to school ads and commercials are out now, and everyone's talking about back to school. And so these are the, you know,
I know. I agree. And I think that the SEL piece to that, you know, all those uncertainties for all of us. But I will say, I know for what I do know for certain is that all of our teachers, all of our staff, all of our administrators, all of our parents, all of our community want what's best for children. I know that for certain. And so hopefully in that united understanding of what we can get to reach some consensus on what that would look like. And obviously, at the end of the day, we could come to a consensus very soon and then still have an uptick in society environmentally and change those best laid plans. So I think we all know that we want the same thing as far as what's best for children. But what that looks like, it's still a little bit early, even though it doesn't seem that early before we have to start rolling on a plan.
And then just to piggyback on what you just said about the SEL piece, that was actually my second question, was just how do we plan on, and maybe you don't have an answer for this yet, but how do we plan on supporting the enormous heavy lifting, the social emotional heavy lifting that the teachers have to do? And how will we be there for them as a system as they're moving through this completely unknown time?
Agreed. And I think with our staff, we want to embed some of that work in those the opening days of those 10 additional days, because that is a big piece of, I talked about this early on in this discussion, that we know not just our students, our parents, everybody is dealing with some trauma from this situation, and this trauma is still ongoing. So I do feel like we can embed some of that work with our staff, certainly in those early 10 days before the students come back. And the students is going to be an ongoing process. And I do know, if you look at the plan, we talked about SEL in that health and safety model, embedding some work with adjustment counselors. What it looks like is still probably to be determined, but I know that that is a huge component of what the that work group had been working on. So Lynn, did you want to talk a little bit more, or enough said on that for now?
Probably enough said on it now, but we do, and between the counselors, the school psychologists, the nurses and all, we have programs and plans and videos and things, and a lot of support for the kids and the parents. The counselors, especially at the Adams School, I believe, I know, speaking from Jess Beatty, who was on the Student Supports Committee, there's a lot of things that are already in place and things they're actively working on and will be working on to develop over the next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, I wasn't questioning the student supports at all. I think that I saw that, I read that. I just really kind of just wanted to throw it out there that the way that we are embracing and supporting the teachers, I just sort of wanted to be out there also.
And Dr. Savard, I think that what we do anyways in our buildings is we create these communities with our teachers. We value our teachers so much. And I think you've heard Mrs. Bottomley and Mr. Jordan, Mr. Keim, and I all talk repeatedly about how much teachers' voice meant so much to us on our building-based committees. And, you know, we talk about being vulnerable with each other. We talk about that we're all going to be going through these cycles of up and down, and that's okay. Yeah. And we're there to support each other. And I think if we continue to build that community of support and teaming, and that it's okay not to have all the answers, having a growth mindset, that's what we do. We're going to be able to support each other throughout. So that is always in our minds, and that's the community that we build in our schools.
I think another aspect that's built into the model is these teams that didn't exist in the same way in our previous way of educating are built in. So those part of it is put in place in order to enable that we have supervision for kids at all levels with the 6-foot distancing. But what that's enabled us to do is to have, team of teachers that allows for, teachers to be able to both, attend to the kids in person, but attend to have another adult who's able to attend to the kids at home, and for them to kind of collaborate and switch. The other aspect is one of the major reasons why we wanted the in-person and the remote portions of the hybrid to be in sync is so that teachers are not planning two different things. And again, so that the individual teacher is not delivering to two different groups at once. There is another person who can attend to our remote kids while a teacher is that. So those parts of the model, which which necessitate staffing in creative ways and with some additional staffing, the hope or the theory is that will make this really Herculean task more manageable for staff. But we do look forward to further conversations with our staff about how do we continue to tweak that to make sure that it is doable and that we can provide the high quality education that we're seeking to do in this this remote learning phase versus our crisis phase last spring.
In the Mindshare portion of the Holliston PTO, the parent teacher organization, has already committed. They really want to focus on, for parents as well, and for staff and for students, a lot of social emotional topics. So I think you'll see more of that. I think Barbara Ryan, has sort of wanted to give everyone space for their planning, but actually, how do you talk to your children during this time? And, so there's definitely another piece outside of the schools that is there to support as well. Lisa had one quick follow-up question, and then Susan, we can, if you want to dismiss the administrator.
Okay, actually I lied. One quick comment and then one quick question. Since I brought up ESY in the context of my recess question, I wanted to make sure that I gave credit where credit is due. I think that program has gone phenomenally well, and that should really tell parents who are watching that you're in really good hands. I feel like, I was nervous about the idea of having my son attend, and I just think that they have gone above and beyond to do a fantastic job. And tomorrow is the last day. Woohoo. And I wanted to make sure that, I know Lynn Bowler and Kelly Camp and Mr. Boudet, and there's a bunch of people on this call. I'm going to miss someone, but a lot of people have worked really hard to make that a good program. And I just wanted to make sure that, since I mentioned that, I wanted to make sure that I highlighted that. My very quick question is, I assumed that when a child is quarantining, they would be able to access the curriculum remotely. But something, okay, so I'm getting nods, yes. Okay, because something that was said tonight made me think that wouldn't necessarily be possible, but I just wanted to confirm that. Maybe Dr. Patello, do you want to just kind of clarify really quick?
The model is constructed so that if that occurs, whether it's a kid quarantining or a kid out for a couple of days because either they're symptomatic and figuring things out or just sick, that they can be still part of that cohort, and they'll just, instead of being half-time in person and half-time remote, they'll be full remote for those days, and then once they're ready, they'll come back in. So yes, it's intended to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Susan, there's one other topic that relates to all the administrators who are on the call, and so I defer to you on this, but the topic is understanding and acknowledging that we are in a pandemic. We talk about the social and emotional well-being of our students, and I'm wondering the rationale behind the asynchronous unified arts. I'm so confused, I guess, about, for some students, that is their whole reason for going to school. So I guess I don't have a specific question, but I guess people want to understand the rationale why it's at the end of the day and asynchronous, if you will. So
yeah, and a piece of that, obviously, there's a scheduling component, a staffing component, a needs that to be able to give as much in-person learning, we need more staff to do so than in normal considerations. However, a bigger piece of that, I know somebody had talked about it in other presentations, the number of students that a staff member would be exposed to do synchronous learning to all of those students. I forget how many, if somebody else can remind me how many blocks we did. Was it 29 blocks or something in Unified Arts at the elementary level? It might be different at some of the other levels. But if we're trying to keep our students physically safe, and that one teacher has been rotating through multiple things, then that teacher could then expose all of those cohort models, and that contact tracing is impossible. So a lot of that is related to physical safety and well-being as well. Some of it's related to scheduling needs, staffing needs, a lot of those pieces. And that's why we do feel it's safer to do that more of an asynchronous. We're hoping to help them teach some lessons that could be shared out music-wise and things over that remote piece to their learning. But I think Peter might want to say a little bit more about that, or one of the principals.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as Dr. Cuss was saying, and there's no way that at this state of the pandemic we would consider having our Unified Arts teachers exposed to that many students. So you know, and yeah, so so that's the primary reason, along with yes, those Unified Arts teachers at the K-8 level are used in order to put together a model that, you know, is able to supervise all kids at 6 foot distancing at the pre-K through 3 level, but also that allows for the teaming at the 4 through 8 level, that allows for not just one teacher to be responsible for both the in-person learning and the remote learning at the same time. We need more staff members to do that. But the primary reason is as well as what Dr. Kuska mentioned, and again, the exposure that Unified Arts would have to way too many kids in these conditions.
But I do also see, having been, having watched when I was an elementary teacher, and we had the music and art teachers come into the classroom while we were in our planning and things like that. I do see some wonderful co-teaching opportunities to embed some of these opportunities within that model. I could see the collaboration with some collaborative planning opportunities that we could embed some of those activities, because Unified Arts does spread interdisciplinary throughout all the work we do. And I really think this is a creative time for teachers to blend some of those models within the co-teaching type or team teaching model that we're proposing.
Great. I like that line of thinking. And I would just say that, you know, at the end of the day, and this may be comparing apples to oranges, but when we're in a budget crisis, you know, we always cut at the Unified Arts level first. And so I understand that we don't have all the teachers, we don't have the staff. I acknowledge that, but let's be creative. So I appreciate that. So keep thinking like that. So with that being said, I would like to offer to the administrators, aside from Peter and Keith, you're stuck with us, but I'd like to offer to the others to be able to go ahead and join your families and do what you need to do. And we'll, sorry.
You said Peter and Keith, so that means I can leave as well?
Oh, no, you're stuck with us too, sorry. You're stuck with us. So thank you to you all, and maybe we'll see you tomorrow night. I don't know what the plan is, but thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to spend a little time, I'd like Keith to spend a little time talking about transportation and some of the questions that have come up, or I don't have a specific question personally, but I would like to talk about it a little bit because we haven't mentioned it much. So could you?
So do you want me to go back to like transportation law, how a bus's wheels work, or, okay, sorry.
No, thank you.
Okay. The guidelines that came out from DESE, I believe it was July 22nd, allowed for us to do a 3-foot distance between students on the bus. That allowed us to go from a number of about 12 students on a bus to 25. It basically allows us to put one child in a row. what we will do is the first child on the bus will go all the way to the back of the bus, go sit next to the window. The next child on the bus will go all the way to the back of the bus on the opposite side and sit in the aisle. And they'll keep going window, aisle, window, aisle, window, aisle. And, thank you, Cynthia, I appreciate it. So they'll be going through that. They also suggested, I don't want to say recommended, they suggested that recommended we consider, so I'll take that as a suggestion, that we have a bus monitor on the bus to ensure that the students are both staying in their seats, because it'll be assigned seats, staying in their seats and observing the social distancing on a bus. The challenge that creates for us is, again, that's 25 students per bus. The high school middle school run is 15 buses at 25 students per bus. That's 375 students. Last year, we transported on the order of 900 students at that level. So you're looking at, a significant gap in what we can transport and not. And before you jump in and say that, well, what if students, turn down a seat or something? Because the number for sixth grade is we have 121 students that we have to transport by state law, greater than 2 miles, K to 6, so they're in 6. So if they live greater than 2 miles, there's 121 of those 375 seats accounted for. I need to account for them even if they choose remote, because unless we somehow can enforce that once you choose remote, you're out forever, I have to be able to put them back on a bus. So I have to account for them on the bus. Then when you think of hybrid, you might say, well, they're only coming every other day. If I only account for them on the days that they're coming, then if we ever do go to a fully in mode, I'm then throwing people off of the bus because I still have to put them on. So thank you, Lisa. So from that, it really forces us to lock us down to basically what we start with. We have to assume every child that is, coming is on the bus, and the hybrid doesn't help us. And selecting remote doesn't help us at this stage. So just for some quick numbers, like I said, there's 121 students that we need to account for at sixth grade for those 375 seats. K through 2, we have 303 students that we have to account for the 375 seats. At the Miller School, we have 374 students to account for the 375 seats. The other challenge, obviously, is how many seats do we leave available for people who may move into town or even move within town? Somebody may move from Mudville to, Adam Street or something. So that's going to be a little bit of a balance for us. Yes, Cynthia, go ahead. You're telling me to stop.
I get to ask a question. Well, I'm just, I'm curious, because if you're saying 121 students, that's who's eligible. That's not who's signed up, because generally if you don't ask for a bus pass in time, like by the deadline, you don't get one, or you get on the wait list to get a bus pass, right? Because I live in the Queens, it's packed. Like there's no getting one if you don't apply on time.
Except for students who are mandated to transport. If they don't sign up on time, we still have to have a seat available for them. We can't lock them out by law. So we have to have a seat available for them.
Okay.
We can charge them a late fee, but it's okay. That's the only ammunition that we have in that. So I have tomorrow a DESI call about transportation.
Okay.
That I know this is going to be a topic because we're all kind of struggling with this capacity issue.
Yeah.
And unless we can either, choose the Cynthia plan of, ask, get going forward
well.
to no
way bidet.
Can we document that?
Exactly. There's a lot of no's around me. We know that. Or can we take advantage of children who choose remote that we could, again, lock them out? If they don't allow us to, if they don't give us a waiver, I don't say violate because we don't violate law here. If they don't give us a waiver to pass to be able to avoid that, then we're going to be stuck with the 375 student limit per run. And the 375, now we've also going to absorb additional costs because we're going from 12 buses to 15 buses now at the elementary complex, because otherwise I'd only have 12 times 25. Whoopsie, calculator didn't go on. I don't feel like thinking. My calculator's still not going on. There we go, 12 times 25. So 300 seats, I'd lose 75 seats. So, that would be a bad thing. So luckily for us, I'll say luckily, the cost of the additional 3 buses is less than the savings from the 10 less days of school or 9 less days of school, whichever we end up with. But, so not a big difference, but so it's basically a wash. So that's where we kind of stand right now. So.
Still though, like I have a 6th grader, we live outside of 2 miles, and if I have 2 other kids, so I'll be driving them because there won't be room for the older kids in the bus anyway. So in any circumstance, I would be driving that 6th grader. So you can just take my kid off that number 1 right there, because I won't be requesting it one way or the other.
Is this being recorded by any chance?
It is. Go for it. I'm going to be driving the kids. I got 2 other ones. What am I going to do with them? Be like, hey, you take the bus, the rest of them?
I'm in the same situation.
Again, as much as, okay.
How about a waiver? I'll sign a waiver. Does that help?
Desi actually had in an earlier discussion wanting us to come up with creative ways of incentivizing people to voluntarily give up their seat for the year. We thought about, offering people their choice of teacher, but the principals didn't much care for that. We thought about offering them, preferential seats at graduation if their child makes it through Holliston. I mean, the fact is there's not much we can offer as an incentive. I mean, I can't give you cash. So, so if you come up with a good incentivized thing, I'm fine with that as well. I guess we can look down the path of people who turn it down, and I can certainly see if we can.
I think people will turn it down if they have other kids that aren't eligible for the bus, given the limited number of bus passes we even would have available for those spaces, given the guidelines. I don't see why people like Stacy and I, who have kids that would not qualify, would just say, okay, well, I'm relinquishing my seat for a kid who really needs it.
Again, we can certainly go down that path. It's not going to create a ton of seats. I'll be honest with you. I don't mind going down that path. We would just have to ask them to assure us that they're not going to go down this path and come sue us later. But then I have to put a $50,000 bus on, for that. But that being said, I don't mind going down that path. We're still going to have deficits of meeting requests no matter what. And we have talked a little bit about what to do in that scenario with regards to lotteries, and do we give preferential treatment for younger kids on the route? So would a kindergartner get preferential treatment in a lottery situation over a 2nd grader? Would an 8th grader or 7th grader get preferential treatment over a 10th or 11th grader? So we haven't really come up with what we want to do there. Obviously, we would run this past you, but I don't think we should do it on a. And my subcommittee agreed with this. I don't believe we should do it on a first come first serve basis, because I'll have people lined up right now. And I just don't, I don't want to do that. I think a lottery, and, if we have to televise the lottery and give people numbers to get them to believe that it's on the up and up, that's fine, so it's, that's kind of where we are right now. So not perfect, but.
I'm not sure about the lawsuit piece, Keith. I would think maybe more of a civil rights violation, which can take 3 years to go through that whole process. Done it before. It's not a fun place to be either.
No, we've gone there in this district as well. So when you have to get lawyers, I'll say it's a lawsuit. So yes, Don. Sorry.
Thanks. I have a couple questions. One of them is about substitutes. We're all looking at a year where teachers have families. They're going to have kids that are sick and they're going to need to quarantine. They may get sick and need to quarantine. I'm really concerned about the sub issue. In the past, we have grouped a number of classes together in the high school cafeteria, and we can't do that. That is not what I think we're talking about. So are we, and I'm also concerned the district has a number of retired teachers and older individuals that maybe aren't coming back that we've used as substitutes for many years. Have we reached out to figure out who's coming back? Have we tried to maybe solicit college students who are working remotely this year, or at least build up our sub list? So that's one, what we're doing to build up our subs, and two, put together training videos, or, I mean, I'm hearing so much about the 10 days of planning and how much is, I mean, this really is, your hybrid model is like trying to land 50,000 airplanes in 3 minutes. It's phenomenal. You know, there's a lot of parts to it. I just want to bring up, increase the sub list and how to train them, because there's a lot to this. And as parents and the staff, it's all taking us hours of reading and listening to understand it. So how are we going to train the subs? How are we going to increase the sub list?
One of the things that we're doing, as coming forward as a proposal, is to increase. We currently have one, but it's to increase the number of permanent subs. So people would have a permanent job then, which would allow them to have benefits, which allow them, you know, there's a number of items that would be attractive for someone who may be unemployed or may have lost their health insurance as their hours were reduced below, you know, the 20-hour threshold. So we do have that in our working plans right now. I hadn't thought of the college students as, because them being remote, but I guess the question would be, is that would they be remote enough to be able to sub for the day? But I'll certainly look into that. There's no question. It's an interesting option. So
Can I just say something real quick? There's college students too who are deferring for a year. They're just taking a year off.
Yep.
So they're not even remote. They're just taking that gap year, and maybe their gap years between their sophomore and junior year. So I think there's some people there that are potentially available.
I like the idea, just, you know, again, because of, you know, again, these people do need jobs, and especially if they were going into the education, you know, profession, you know, if they felt that may be in their mix, it's a good way to first get your feet wet in it, of course, during a pandemic, but, you know, but to get your feet wet and decide, is this something that I may want to continue and look into?
Another element of the support that's built into, especially the K through 8 model, is that, you know, pretty much every teacher is teamed with one or two other teachers. And so when a substitute comes, in addition to any to training that we need to do with our substitutes, I agree on that with that wholeheartedly. They would also be, you know, not exclusively on their own as they're subbing. So the way that those models are working is that, you know, the different adults will work together in order to support one another. Obviously, if a substitute is one of those people for during the day, that those roles might shift a bit. But they will have individuals that we don't typically have that they can team with, either in the same classroom with them or in the adjacent classroom, so that they can, adjacent classrooms, but with less kids than you typically would have, so that they can, you know, rely on that support and in mentoring. So that's a, you know, part of the reason for that model is because of our real concern around, you know, the need for subs in this really extraordinary time.
To the extent possible, if we have two CP geometry classes going on at the same block and the teacher is absent, is it possible for those kids in the second class to remote into the first one? Do we have the technological capabilities? Same question at the middle school. If team 1 is teaching English and team 2 is teaching English at the same time, can we remote in? Can the hybrid portion, the hybrid remote kids, remote into the teacher that is present? So just questions about it. Bathrooms. Okay. Thinking about Miller and up to 460 kids in that building, and then the number of bathrooms that we have, are we going to have some kind of scheduling, especially before eating, so that we don't have 10 or 20 kids? Will we have monitors? How are we going to keep the numbers down in the bathrooms?
Again, Dr. Kusk is going to be presenting to you a job description for, you know, a health and safety monitor, which would help in facilitating that. One of the other things that we're proposing to do is with regards to the cleaning of it is, again, there will be a regular scheduled cleaning. The additional staff will be going around and picking up those things and hopping in and out of bathrooms. The jobs are going to be, basically on your feet for the 8-hour shift because there's always going to be something else to wipe, something else to clean. They're not going to be servicing, a teacher for, can you get me a ream of paper? The additional staff that we're going to be adding is all going to be around health and safety or cleaning and safety. And that's key. They're not, there to do the other tasks that are normally done by others that are on staff. There is a challenge, especially at the high school level, where, again, the bathrooms can be congregation spaces. There's no question about that. And we are going to have to stay on top of that, making sure that if we hear, something going on in the bathroom, even more so than normal, of getting involved and making, again, we don't, as much as we, from a safety perspective, we want to make all bathrooms single use. It's not practical with regards to certain times of the day. And so, again, it's working within those constraints, trying to encourage and instruct children about the 6-foot distancing. We have talked about if there's, and we'll talk about the boys' room, if there's multiple urinals there to only have one urinal there. So at least they're not standing next to each other. That, again, they can maintain social distancing as they're taking turns there. So it's those sorts of things that we are working through at this time. And again, trying to make sure that we keep people as safe as possible.
Keith, along those lines, because my concern is at the high school and middle school level in terms of trying to keep the congregating down. So what happens at the high school level when the kids leave to go home and they're all driving, and I'm talking juniors and seniors, they're all driving each other around town. The driving isn't our issue, but the congregating till they get off of the property is our issue. How are we going to deal with that?
So you want me, are you asking, can we stop children from not being socially distant when they're not under our care and custody? No? When they're under our care and custody.
I think she's talking about on the premises as they're exiting, getting into cars. Are they going to be hanging around the cars? I agree. We do have to do something and be very present outside the building. Our administration is going to have to be really present out there to try to move students along and things like that. Once they get in the cars, I do worry because we're encouraging this physical distancing, and if they're driving to school together, they're not following that 6-foot model or even a 3-foot model for transportation at that point. That's tricky.
We also have the campus aide at the high school who does work in the parking lot, and he has a very good relationship with the current staff. He was at graduation and is looking forward to coming back. So again, if we have the opportunity to, we would direct more towards that. Dismissal is going to be a challenge. There's no question about that. We want, if we have 10 doors and we got, 60 kids, we want 6 kids to go out each door. But we know that's not going to happen realistically. But again, that's a piece of whether it be the health and safety monitor, the existing staff we have. It's going to be a team effort. It's, and I'm not trying to be a jerk and say it takes a village, but in some of these issues, it is going to take all of us to participate in it to try to make sure that people stay as safe as possible, and whether that be, faculty, staff, or students. So.
And I foresee central office staff being very visible in these scenarios at the beginning of the year until we get into some of these routines as well. Usually, in previous roles, we did that the first few days with buses. This is going to be a little longer approach. I think that we have to reinforce that as a whole team.
Dawn, I know you have more questions.
I do. And since we're going to address the calendar tomorrow night, and this fits into that, we know about the 10 days, the planning days. And I guess just for people who aren't sure what that is, we are required to do 180 days of instruction, 990 hours for secondary education. I think it's something like 900 hours for elementary. The commissioner reduced that down to 170 days, and then also correspondingly reduce down the hours of instruction to like 935. But I guess my question on that is the 10 days. I've seen some school districts where they might only be using 4, 5, or 6 of the planning days initially, because what we know is this year's dynamic, and we're going to pivot hopefully between, we may pivot back full. We may also pivot remote. But are we reserving any of those planning days for later in the year? Or are we trying to use all 10 of them and put forth something where we don't start until September 15th or 16th?
Right now, we still have to talk about this a little bit further tomorrow. I have that on my calendar for Peter and Keith and I to talk about. But right now, we're thinking at the beginning of the year, because that's when that initial training is needed for staff, because we do have some other PD days built in throughout the year. And a lot of those are already, for our literacy teams, for example, at the elementary, a lot of those are signed up to do some PD during those days. And I don't think there's any perfect answer to any of these scenarios, but the front loading is pretty consistent for most districts that I've seen. I would be curious to see the rationale from some of the districts that have moved it that way. I haven't talked to them, but if you have more on that, I'd be happy to hear it as well.
It's also possible, Dawn, that because we do have a mandatory open by the 16th, we may not have enough days to use all 10.
Got it. Are we working with, and maybe this isn't working with HPD, but the traffic will be a nightmare. I mean, at the high school picking up, you have all those young drivers trying to pull out of what I would term the most poorly designed parking lot I've ever seen. And it's a challenge where you're backed up on Hollis Street just to get in. And that's with 12 buses fully loaded. So now we're going to lose a lot of that bus space. We're going to be backed up from, Hollis down to 16. Are we coming up with alternative pickup plans, like freshmen get picked up? I don't even know what we would do. Is there any way to walk to a neighborhood and include a loop where we pick people up? Are we running that to ground? And then obviously the same question at Miller. I mean, you had the 5th grade graduation parade and we were backed up all the way down Woodland to 16. So what are we doing to look into traffic pattern improvement?
Okay.
I was going to say the one thing I just want to remind, the hybrid model does mean less students in the building at one time in those 4 to 12 levels. So that will help with a little bit, but not mitigate all of it for sure.
In addition, I'll just go school by school. I've spoken with the police chief and we're going to be moving the buses as well as the administration at the elementary school. We're going to be moving the buses to the middle loop. The parents are going to come in through the entrance that's one way out now. It used to be a two-way. It used to be in and out back in the day. So it's going to be in and out again. I don't know what the traffic terms are. It's the best I can do. But so parents are going to come in, drive through the Placentino loop, drop their kids as quickly as possible, take off, and we're going to force a right-hand turn. Again, the police chief was fine with this, force a right-hand turn onto Woodland Street just to keep traffic from having to cross traffic, which slows them down. And so, at the beginning of the school year, there'll be a police officer there moving moving cars out as quickly as possible to get people into that routine. This will allow buses then to come in and traffic to travel more fluidly through the parking area. For Adams, we're actually in pretty good shape in Adams, in all honesty, because Adams kind of has 3 logical places to pick up and drop off from. The outer loop, where the buses aren't, the loop around the back where the cafeteria is, and then the parent loop on the side. And, that could even bleed into a little bit behind the school. So actually in Adams, we're in pretty good shape. I'm not gonna say I'm not worried, but I'm probably less worried about that school than any of the 3 campuses, I should say. And then at the high school, we've talked about actually to keep, students safe and faculty safe and keep the buses safe is once the last bus is in, we're going to shut down the one that's right over here. If you can look out my window, the entrance at Highland Street to keep people, force them into the parking lot, which I know is the exact opposite of what you just said. But it's to keep people in the parking lot to both for pickup as well as for students who may have a car, but to keep them over there, just because, again, it's keeping everybody else safer. You also have to remember that we are dismissing at 12:43 or something at the high school, so buses won't be involved yet either. So that'll take a good portion of the traffic out. So, and some students may be staying later to have lunch or staying later for a club or something like that. So there's a number of reasons why it's not going to be a big mass exodus like a typical day. And again, as Dr. Kuska says, in a hybrid model, it should only be 54% of the students.
Catherine, do you have questions?
So many. Some of my, I think actually I might just hold them as I feel like they might be answered better during the building level meetings. Because some of what I'm wondering about is how you keep 6 feet away from the first grader who's trying to learn how to read. You know, like what is actually going to look like? What is school going to look like for kids who are that young and still, you know, tripping over their shoes and can't tie their shoelaces? And, you know, so I don't know that that's something we need to talk about right now, but that's I think the building level meetings that will come later. Most of my, as I'm looking through my several hundred questions, I think most of them are the more building level questions.
Lisa, Andy, anyone else with Sin?
Oh, sorry. It's not really like it's a question. It's more of a comment. I know, Dawn, you talked about not wanting your concerns about a phased in approach. And I actually had the opposite response, which was when I think about how we phased in, like, you know, reopening our economy in Massachusetts, we've done this phased in approach where we've worked it out slowly so we don't have to go backwards. And so that's sort of how I'm thinking about as we move forward. And Peter, you talked a little bit about this, and I think that's important, is that I would rather us go slowly as we move into the year, be able to really, you know, rigorously say, okay, we're going to move this group of kids in. Are we all okay? Yes, that's all okay. And then later on, if we're able to say, you know, 6 feet is great, but maybe we don't need 6 feet anymore and we can go to 3 feet and then we can add more students in. I would way rather us do that than rush it and then have to close right away because we weren't careful enough or whatever. So that's just my 2 cents, but we can talk about it more tomorrow.
Go ahead, Dawn.
I guess what I would say is we know from DESE that they want to prioritize as many students in person because they know that type of learning is best. And we are hearing we're going to prioritize pre-K through 3rd for full in person. So I guess my concern is if we can get full in person at the lower levels, we should also, and we're going to kind of sit back on this 3/4 hybrid model at the high school, then we should be prioritizing as much in-person learning because I'm not sure anybody thinks it's going to get better in October or November. So if we are going to give away days later to remote learning, I really think it's important to develop that in-person rapport early on, especially since they are the group that is going 3/4 hybrid, 1/4 remote, and they are the group that is not being brought back full in person.
It seems like this is something we kind of need to deliberate on, right? Because that is something we could amend in the plan before we vote on it. Is that correct?
I think certainly you could give suggestions on if you feel that there's a little, that it wasn't a whole model that you wanted to change, but there are little pieces you would like us to consider and advise us on. Yes, there will be some language that we could put in there related to that, whether it's to say that we consider the phase-in model to be very limited or no phase-in model, or we're okay with a day or two. You know, I mean, there's certainly language, but when we lock in to get too specific, it does give us less flexibility if things change at the last minute too. So it's a little tricky because you don't want to get so exact because there might be some other considerations that we haven't thought of as we move into implementing the model in the fall as we get closer.
I think that I've looked at some other districts and that's also what they were doing. It was doing a phased in approach the way Peter was describing a little bit. And that could only mean like a few days or could it mean a week or I don't know what it means, but anyway. But I agree with you. I mean, I would like our kids to be, in school as much as possible, but we also have to think about, how our reaction to our teachers is going to be and their input into the process, but we still have to go through that hurdle as well. So it's just my thoughts.
Can I jump in with one more thing? I think I like the idea of phasing in just from a logistics and a public health perspective. I think it makes sense to go slowly, be cautious, but maybe part of the answer is to not do it exclusively at the high school level. And I think somebody mentioned this earlier. Forgive me, I don't remember who it was, Dr. Vitello, that maybe it was, you bring back, 6th graders before you bring back 8th graders, or you bring back 9th graders before you bring back 12th graders, or, maybe it should be spread out a little bit better across the district, even to the lower grades, so that it's not so high school, since the phased-in approach isn't primarily impacting just the high school.
Yeah, the current proposal has us phasing in at the elementary and middle school level as well. We were kind of open to, I put forth, what I thought might be a scenario we could do, and that really had, say, the older kids in each school being the first group that entered at the Placentino, so that would be second graders. In that case, it would be second graders, all of them. In fifth grade, that would be, one of the cohorts, fifth graders, and then in middle school would be eighth graders, so that we can have them partly as the older students who are going to have a better time managing it perhaps than some of the younger kids, and then keep the phase in with that. The tricky thing at the high school is because you have cross grades, you can't really do that grade kind of based approach. And so the high school, is promoting, having, while we kind of start to phase in with the elementary and middle school, having that first week, for the reasons that Mrs. Baumley mentioned, phase in that second week. But I think whatever we do, we just kind of want to, there are obviously legitimate concerns from staff and parents around, bringing kids back into school, and we all want to do that. The reason we propose a phase in, though we're again open to adjustments to it, is so that we have more in-person learning in the end. If we thought we could just not phase in and have that confidently, we wouldn't do a phase in. But again, some of the international examples, as well as some other examples in the region, as well as the example that, just the kind of the example that Cynthia mentioned, it gives us much greater confidence. And I think will make our staff and our parents who are legitimately concerned feel better if we kind of do this in an approach. And again, I think the extended school year helped us, and that's part of the phase in. And again, I think part of the phase in too is the hope that, someday we can go to 3 foot, because the different factors within the region allow us to do that.
And in some ways, I feel like districts for years have been doing a phase-in model. When you think of kindergarten orientation and things like that, typically our kindergartners start later in most districts to start the year off and get them to come in for small time with the teacher. Sometimes even upper grades have phased in that you might have ninth graders start because they have more to get used to the building while upper students are not. And so there's all, phase-in doesn't have to mean a long term of time. It could just be, one day we start one group and another and give them some extra training and orientation through that process as well. I think it can look very different at different grade levels.
Dawn? In that phased-in remote model, are you envisioning teachers teaching for the full instructional period? So I think there's an anxiety of when people hear remote, that it would look like spring. And I know we're saying it's not. And I think even acknowledging that DESE decreased the number of instructional hours we had to provide in the spring. But as of right now, my understanding is that they are not decreasing the amount of instructional hours, whether you are in a remote program or an in-person program. So in your phased-in model, if you're remote, are we expecting the classes to follow the bell schedule, that you're going to get your full 70-some minutes?
That is my understanding. I'm not saying that I see that as like the teacher kind of, doing direct instruction for 77 minutes, but there'll be, kind of a beginning part of the period where they'll do some work with kids. Then they might have kids in breakout groups, or might have kids do some independent work where they're still logged on, but they're not really, listening to the teacher or listening to all kids in the class at once. And there'd be some time where they would kind of convene again prior to going to the next period. So that type of thing, I think there would be a heavy emphasis on routines and community building during that time. We would do that typically in an in-person thing, even much more so at the elementary, but we do that at the high school level as well. I was a high school teacher for years. And so that would be in those routines, and that community building would be even more important as we're coming back from last spring and such. So that's the way I picture it. But Ms. Bonnelly would be able to talk about it more at the middle school, at high school, and then the other teachers, if we did a phased approach, or other principals could talk about it at the other levels as well.
Catherine?
So I want to make sure that I'm understanding when Principal Bonnelly was talking about the phase-in for the high school, it was the rationale that was given was so that nobody feels like they started behind. No one feels marginalized or ostracized, right? Am I right? That's what she said.
That was one of the reasons she did cite, because she wanted to get them used to what it would look like, because now it is going to be a more rigorous remote learning model. So they all kind of start into that routine together, so that if and when they do go full remote later in the year, they have those kind of expectations and procedures and protocols in place for what their role as a student is. And also, we talked about trying to embed some of that SEL things that we talked about in that time that students are together in remote as well.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, we don't have the option of starting with all the kids together in person, but we do have the option of starting with all the kids together in a remote environment. So that's part of the rationale, as well as the kind of the safety that comes with it as well.
And so I can see that, but then you're not doing that in 4th and 5th grade, right?
It's a possibility. We haven't specifically talked about whether or not we would do it for a day. There is a possibility we might do a slight bit of phasing as well. We just haven't worked out all the details to that.
Okay.
So I think if we did what I was proposing around, 5th grade came in, say for the first 2 days before 4th and 3rd did, we would be doing that with 4th and 3rd. And so we would have some groups that would be starting together all remote. Again, part of also the rationale for the high school is you can't really bring in a couple grades or a grade at a time.
Right. No, I understood that part. I guess just so sort of from the health perspective, from the research that I've read that has come from other countries, the phasing in that countries either did well or didn't do well at all, that was the ones that didn't do well were the countries who brought all the students back at once. And we're clearly not doing that. I guess I'm not completely, when we're talking about phasing in, I'm not completely clear that we're doing that when we're talking about it being like a day or two. Like the phasing in that didn't happen in those other countries was they didn't hybrid, they didn't have cohorts, they didn't phase at all. So I'm not sure that there's a ton to be gained by phasing in by a couple of days. I could be wrong. It's just, it seems like, to what Don was saying before, like if what is critical is the face-to-face time, I don't know that the 2 days is a huge phase. Like the phasing that we're doing, we've got in my opinion, a great model and a great plan of having the students and in their cohorts and in the way that all works. I don't know how you got that to figure out because it's so intricate. But I am having a hard time seeing the benefit of like what Nicole Bodman was saying earlier, the first couple of days. It doesn't necessarily have to be 2 weeks, which I was very relieved to hear her say, and that it could just be a couple of days. But I don't understand what we're gaining from those just 2 days. It's obviously, Lisa said this is something we can talk about some more, but I'm not putting these pieces together.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that would be probably better if we could discuss that more specific to the buildings, because it is hard. There's so many components to wrap our heads around. It is hard to see all of the benefits and pros and cons.
I do think it's worth mentioning, though, that it's not just about public health. I mean, I do think it's important to consider logistics and just the Herculean task of doing this. I think a phased-in approach helps the administrators and the teachers to a huge extent. And that's, I don't want to, even if there's not a crystal clear public health benefit, I think we do have to consider the logistical and
And if that's all part of it, I'm like, I can then get my head around it a little bit more. But the idea that it's better for everyone to start remote, I wasn't hearing that being a stronger argument than being face to face with your teacher.
Yeah, certainly with the younger ones, I definitely see that for our logistical pieces, having different kids come at different days gives us more all hands on deck, that teachers could team up to do some of those routines and trainings in the building. I see that piece. But yes, I think we need to talk.
I meant more the high school.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think that we need to talk a little bit more about that.
Dawn?
So two last questions. I really want to talk about outdoors. So you know what, let's tee that up first. So there are some schools like Weston's assistant superintendent announced that every indoor classroom will have a designated space outdoors. Teachers can choose whether they want to teach inside or outside. And I don't know that that was limited by tents. So I just want to be clear here. I understand tents are a component for weather conditions, but we have kids out at camp all summer and they're not under tents the whole time. So can we also really vigorously talk about outdoor spaces and giving people the choice to teach outside? And then the part of that I'm also concerned about is the technological move to Chromebooks and away from books, not being limited by that for using outdoor space. Like, are we going to have a hotspot? How are we going to make that work? We just had a graduation and there must have been 235 metal folding chairs out there. Can we put those in groups of 10 or 11 in different spaces outside? Is that something we could do for a limited period of time? Sometimes in the younger grades, we would have kids, it might have just been pre-K or kindergarten, you'd bring a rolled up towel and you'd sit on your towel. But to the extent we can get them outdoors, I really want to talk about that.
The perfect example of that is if you come past the high school, if you drive past the high school on a warm day, whether it be in the fall or the spring, there are classes outside. And without exaggeration, to sit there and say there are 4 to 6 classes outside on any given warm day, I don't think is an exaggeration. One of the things that we're doing to help facilitate that, as you mentioned, the chairs at graduation, they're not our chairs. It's part of our plan right now to go purchase 800 chairs, 200 for each school, to help facilitate being able to actually have a sit-down period outside. I have spoken to Dan McLeod regarding where we can place people with regards to making sure they do have internet access. And if we have to purchase additional equipment, we certainly can. There are a couple of different means for that. In that, yes, I agree, Dawn, we are looking at outside. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where each class would have necessarily a spot, but again, that's not saying it couldn't happen either. I just, again, one of the things that we are planning on doing with the tents is that I have 4 on order that are not as robust as I'd like them to be. So we're actually going to be placing them in the courtyard. So at least we stand a better chance of them having survived a storm. So again, it's creating at least another spot outdoors that if weather went a little foul, we'd be able to have somebody outside in that scenario. But no, I agree that, again, it's one of our strategies both for heat as well as ventilation to have them be outside. And it's also a great learning experience to be able to be outside as well. There's lots of other things you can do, especially in a science class, or at the earlier grades. So no, I fully expect us to have a big outdoor presence.
And I promised to wrap it up, but I did say there was a second one, and here's what it is. At the high school, in a hybrid model, you have about 440 to 460 kids there. You said you're going to turn the hallways into one-way directions and increase the transit time in between blocks to about 10 minutes. And based on what Lynn Bowler gave as, a close contact is within 6 feet for more than, did she say 10 minutes, 15 minutes? I'm less worried about the transitory time. I'm incredibly worried about DSB. The high school students congregate. How are we going to keep them from congregating during DSB?
The high school may or may not be able to facilitate one-way traffic, and that's something we have discussed. The stairs will be one-way, though. We have actually, you just moved on me, Don. the stairs will be one way with regards to, because again, that's a guideline. So Nicole and I have actually worked out a path of go up this one, that one, go, of serpentining your way through the school. The congregating during DSB, the way I understand the model, and Peter, correct me if you know that I'm wrong, is that students will not be as remote or as fluid during DSB, that they will be kind of dedicated to the room that they came from, which was their home base for DSB is going to be basically their base for DSB, as opposed to when under normal circumstances, it's a home base and they move from there. So that's the difference that I understand about the hybrid or the COVID DSB versus the previous DSB. Am I correct, Peter?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Sure, there'll be some kids who are going to, say, chorus or band ensemble groups, but the great majority of kids, my understanding, and I believe it is, that they would be remaining in the class that they just had, and that class that they just had rotates throughout the cycle, so it's not the same class for DSB each time, in order to minimize that cross contamination that can happen during DSB in particular.
Right. Andy, did you have any other questions? You're good? Okay. So there's one other thing that I needed to bring up this evening, and it has been it's been on my mind. I've seen it posted everywhere, and today it was brought to our attention twice. So I just wanted to share with the community. The school committee is meeting remotely right now because we're in the summer months. And typically, school committee meets once in August and never in July. And so people have questioned why the school committee can sit in their, cozy, comfy, remote spots without a mask, and we're expecting our children to sit in a classroom. So I guess I just want to be, and I am being a little flip, I guess. I guess I just want people to understand that our next school, our official first school committee for the 2020-2021 school year is in August, and August 20th, and we can make that decision if we want to meet together or not. But right now we're in planning mode, and so right now we're working remotely, and that's really all I'm going to say to justify that. And I'm also going to say that, yes, we will eventually be meeting in person, but for right now, we are working remotely, and it's what's working best for this particular committee. So school committee members, I want you just to think about your comfort level, and we can have a discussion tomorrow. We can even have it on the 20th as to when we feel comfortable getting together in a group. There are 7 of us on the committee, and then we have 3 administrators. So I believe right now the sort of guidance is that you're not supposed to have more than 10 people. Is it 25? 25. So, we can think about it. So I just want you to have that in the back of your minds to consider for meetings moving forward beginning in September. Tomorrow evening, we are going to talk about the calendar. We're going to talk about some new positions that's needed for the reopening plan. Peter, you're going to give an update on some, am I saying that right? Anti-bias curriculums tomorrow night, right? Sorry, there's so many meeting agendas in my head right now. We also, I want to share with the committee, we may need to have a meeting on Monday evening to make a final vote for the framework. I know some of us are supposed to be away from Holliston. I am going to have the meeting posted. I think I'm going to do it for 6 because I know that Monday is the 10th, and that's the day that we need to hit submit on the plan. So I want to give Susan and Peter and Keith time to actually hit send Monday night. So I am going to recommend that we hold a meeting possibly for Monday if we need to vote. Should we decide tomorrow that we still have lingering questions about this framework. And I just want to acknowledge that tonight, Susan, you said that the easy way out would have been to say we're just remote, and that Holliston didn't take the easy way out. And so regardless of what anyone feels, I think that, kudos to our administrators for not taking the easy way out. So I applaud you for that. Any other questions about tomorrow, Susan?
I just wanted to ask you, just in consideration of if there are some edits that you would like us to consider on Monday, would it be possible to hold the meeting in the daytime so that we would have time to make any adjustments to get it to Desi that night?
So committee members, do you have time Monday morning? Because I'm one of those people who's not supposed to be in Holliston, so I'd rather not cut my day. So I'd rather either morning or night.
Yes.
9:30?
The earlier the better.
Sure.
9?
9?
You have a posting requirement though, 48 hours, so which will happen tomorrow morning. So it's going to be 48 hours from when it can be posted.
So you better be safe with like 10, right? You think unless
9:57?
I mean, I can certainly send an email to Lisa tonight and ask her to get it. Obviously she's going to be in at 8 usually tomorrow. So it's possible, and just give her the backup that if it couldn't be 9, then 10. How's that?
Okay, let's aim for 9 and we'll do 10 if we're okay.
Before we go, can we tell anybody watching where they can see the full plan, the draft plan? Is it posted online?
Yes, and I did today when I sent a reminder to staff, to parents. I sent them the link to both the website, the fall reopening resources, that we have the draft plan and the presentation from Monday night on there. I also sent them the link to the school committee meeting from Monday night within that email that came out from Bright Arrow today. So they should all have it already, but it is on the...
It's also listed under fall reopening. It's right.
I was just looking at that.
Fall reopening on the main site.
Yes, fall reopening resources.
I didn't immediately see it. So I was like, wait, where is it? So yeah, so people watching at home, if you look at the top, the far right tab is fall reopening, and that's where everything lives.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Moved by Cynthia.
Seconded by Andy.
Moved by Cynthia, seconded by Don and Andy. Roll call vote. Mrs. Stevnik.
Yes.
Mr. Morton.
Yes.
Ms. Zaborski.
Yes.
Dr. Savard. Ms. Koshin.
Yes.
Mrs. Raffi. Yes. It is 8:18. We are now adjourned. Good night. I'll see you tomorrow night at 7. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Good night. Thank you.
Bye.